at least. Baby blood and baby bones. Baby butter for the baby scones. Little baby feet, little baby toes. Every one of us wants the nose. Baby's had such very bad luck. Now into baby we will talk.
Hello and welcome to a brand new year of the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack
and Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff. This week on the show, we are discussing the Doctor Who Christmas special, The Church on Ruby Road, which was the debut of the 15th Doctor, Ncuti Gatwa, and his new companion, Ruby Sunday, played by Millie Gibson. This is the first time we've gotten to talk about a Doctor Who Christmas special since 2017, because Chris Chibnall didn't make them. He made New Year's specials, and even if they had been on Christmas, we wouldn't have talked about them because they were garbage. But anyway, we're back. We get to talk about an all-new Doctor, an all-new episode. We get to do some other odds and ends as we kick off a new year of the podcast. I'm psyched, Sean, because back in the day, the first episode of the year for us almost always was the Doctor Who Christmas special. I remember, the first episode of 2013, I think, was The Snowmen. Twice Upon a Time was our first episode of 2018, because that was the end of 2017. So this will be fun. I'm glad we get to do it again, and it was an awesome episode.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's just very life-affirming to have Doctor Who be a thing that you can watch and have fun with, and also have fun with on Christmas. Because yes. I missed doing that. I missed being able to watch a new Doctor Who on Christmas. And this is like a proper Christmas episode, and it feels like Russell T Davies. In a number of ways, it feels like he kind of has been influenced by Stephen Moffat's run on the show, because this is a Moffat quality Christmas special, because RTD historically it was a bit hit or miss with his Christmas specials when he was running the show. Moffat, outside of the Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe, all of his Christmas specials were great, and this is a great episode. So very excited to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right about that. The only one from his run that I would say was sort of in this par was The Runaway Bride, which has a lot of good stuff in it. But other than that, his Christmas specials always felt a little bit like, I'm very exhausted from writing the last season. Oh no, what do we do now? And this one does not have that quality at all. This is very... this is better than the last time he introduced a Doctor at Christmas, which would be the Christmas Invasion. And I like parts of that episode quite a bit. But this is as a Doctor introduction story, this is very good.
Yes, very, very good. Very excited to talk about it.
Yes. But yeah, Sean, this is a new year of the show. We're in 2024 now, which means this is season 13 of the Weekly Stuff Podcast. Here's a couple of shows we have now outlasted, now that we are in our 13th season. The Big Bang Theory, 2.5 Men, Bones, NYPD Blue. This one got to me, Sean. Murder, She Wrote. Cheers and Frasier each only did 11 seasons. MASH only did 11 seasons. We're at 13. All those long shows, got nothing on us. We've been going longer than any of them.
Yeah, fuck them. That's what I say.
Yes. Most of those shows I just said aren't particularly great. Murder, She Wrote, and NYPD Blue, maybe. But, Cheers, Frasier, MASH, yes. But the ones that were 12 seasons, we can definitely gloat over the Big Bang Theory. I'm fine with that. We put more effort into this podcast than I think they did into that show.
Yeah, and then one day, the day will come, we'll be like, NCIS? No, it's the Weekly Stuff Podcast. They'll have to stop making that show, though.
What season is NCIS on? I'm looking this up right now.
I'm pretty sure it's still coming out, right? They're still making new NCIS
20
episodes.
Seasons. We're a ways away from that, Sean.
Well, eventually we ain't stopping. Eventually all those people will be dead, and we'll be still trudging on.
We'll see. All right. Sounds good. Yeah. So, Sean, what have you been up to? I guess, quick piece of housekeeping I just wanted to mention before I ask you what you've been up to. I did put out my top 10 films of 2023 list on jonathanlack.com last week. It was also a bonus episode here in the podcast feed, so you might have already heard it. But it was me counting down. I called it the top 10 films. I also had a second 10 on there. I had some honorable mentions. One of the main 10 was a 5-way tie between all the movies Wes Anderson made last year, because he made 5 movies. People don't seem to know that, because 4 of them were for Netflix, so no one saw them. But they were really good. So there you go. I had a lot of movies on that list. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, Sean.
No, I've not seen it yet. But yes, I will take a look at that, because you have both a written list and you have a podcast version, right?
Yes, the podcast version is just me reading the written list, so you're not necessarily missing anything. If you do go to the written list, it has links to reviews of all the movies. I think on that entire list, there's only 2 or 3 movies I did not write a review of. One of those was Godzilla -1. We did a big podcast review of, so just linked to that. And a couple of them I had written reviews and podcast reviews, like John Wick 4 or something like that. So I wrote a lot of movie reviews last year. I wrote almost 40, I think. And that's the most movie reviews I've written since 2014. So it was fun. I got back into the swing of things this year. I had a lot of fun putting it together. This was a crazy year for movies. We don't talk about new movies as much on the podcast as we do like games and stuff, but man, you'll go listen to that episode or read my list if you're interested, because this was an incredible year. The top 6 were very hard in particular for me to break down.
Yeah, it does feel like this year, we have seen, and with another one, with the Aquaman sequel, we have seen the superhero movies just sort of like stumbling drunkenly through the Hollywood box office throughout the year. But then you have lots of, whether they're like big scale or smaller scale movies, you have stuff like Oppenheimer and Barbie, obviously, but you also have things like fucking Godzilla -1, a Japanese movie, or The Boy and the Heron, that are getting like really good, both critical reception, but then also really good commercial reception as well. So it does feel like it is a really big kind of transitionary year. It was what it feels like to me from the outside looking in terms of film.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great year, and there's always good stuff around the edges, and there's always great foreign films and art house films and what have you. But like, I do want to say, I think people have this impression because all the superhero movies bombed that Hollywood didn't make anything good. That's just not true. I think actually we saw an interesting transition where like you had John Wick 4 and Mission Impossible 7, and you had Barbie and Oppenheimer as original movies, and like there were a lot of really great wide release movies this year that were like big blockbusters, and you even had some foreign films come in and be big wide release movies, like you just mentioned with Godzilla and Boy and the Heron. I just went to see Boy and the Heron the 3rd time yesterday. That would have been from when we're recording December 28th, almost sold out theater, like just on a random, that would have been a Thursday, and it's a holiday, week, but still, like that was a lot of people for a subtitled showing of The Boy and the Heron. And again, last time Miyazaki had a movie out, it didn't even play in major theaters because Disney didn't give it the push. So I think this was actually a really astounding year for movies. I'm really excited to, hear what other people thought. I'm interested to see what the Oscars do with things, because it's Oppenheimer and Barbie were not on my top 20. Barbie was just outside the top 20. I didn't really like Oppenheimer. I wouldn't mind if either of those wind up winning Oscars, for the only reason that they're like real substantive movies that made a lot of money. And that's like, but they have a chance to do a Titanic or Lord of the Rings again. That might be interesting. We'll see.
I just like that there's that Godzilla -1 poster that's like for your consideration in all categories. Yes. And it's just fucking Godzilla there. I do hope that the Big G finally wins, his actor Academy Award that he's been gunning for since 1954. He's been in the game for a long time. He deserves it, even if it's just that kind of, hey, we know we should have given it to you forever ago. But his performance was phenomenal. So.
Right, this would not be a Scent of a Woman situation where they give it to Al Pacino for a movie that no one cares about. This would be Godzilla in a real career highlight getting it, Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. If that movie does not get a visual effects nomination, there's no point in having that category.
Yeah.
I mean, for the love of God. Yeah.
It's very true.
Anyway, so if you have not gone and seen that list, you can go look. Sean, do you want to guess what my number 1 was?
The Boy and the Heron.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, I'm going to have to think about this for a second. I'm like, oh, wait, no. A Miyazaki movie came out this year. I don't have to think about it at all.
And, I did acknowledge that in the text. I say, is this predictable? Yeah. But, I did go see it again yesterday after I'd already put the piece out, and I was just like, oh, yeah, no, this is just easily my favorite. And I also genuinely think the best. I think it is genuinely a masterful, amazing movie. I think it's one of his epics on par with Mononoke or Spirited Away or something. It's incredible. Have you seen it yet? I'm curious.
I have not found the time to see it yet.
That is okay. You should. It's amazing. Anywho, but what else have you been up to, Sean? Let's get into our first stuff portion of 2024.
Yeah, well, it's been a while since we did a Weekly Stuff podcast, and then since it's over the break, like it feels like it's been 1,000 years.
I know.
We've been doing some podcasts with Japanimation Station, but we have not done a Weekly Stuff. I think the last time we did a Weekly Stuff was I was about halfway through Alan Wake 1,
Yes,
or Alan
you were.
Wake Remastered, and I have been on an epic remedy journey. I've had an illness and I have been taking my remedy. That is my pun for the podcast. So I have since then, I finished Alan Wake Remastered, including the 2 DLC episodes or whatever that are in there. I played Alan Wake's American Nightmare, the 2012 Xbox Live Arcade game. I have replayed through Control, or I played through Control Ultimate Edition. I originally played the PS4 version when that came out. I played the PS5 port of it. And then I have also very recently, just 2 days ago, I finished Alan Wake 2. So I played a lot. And there was a moment where I was like, should I play Quantum Break? And I might eventually play Quantum Break because I've got that Xbox Series S, which I booted up for Alan Wake's American Nightmare. But I've not played Quantum Break yet. But I've almost played every single Remedy game. I feel like I should go and replay Max Payne 1 and 2 now because it's been a long time since I played those. But yeah, so running through some of those, I'm not going to talk about all of these super in depth, but Alan Wake 1 is a fucking great game. Particularly the 2 DLC episodes, The Signal and The Writer, which are just included with the remastered version. Those are the best thing in that game. This is kind of spoilers a little bit for Alan Wake 1, but it's something that it's like the premise for Alan Wake 2. So people probably are vaguely aware of it. At the end of Alan Wake, the main character, Alan Wake, is trapped in what is called the Dark Place, similar to kind of like what happens to Coop at the end of Twin Peaks, into like Twin Peaks The Return. It's a very similar kind of setup because Twin Peaks is a very big inspiration for Alan Wake. But the Dark Place is this sort of weird dimension that's underneath Crater Lake in the small town of Bright Falls, and he traps himself in there in order to save his wife, Alice Wake, which is kind of what the plot of Alan Wake is him trying to get his wife out of there, and he's discovering these pages of a manuscript he wrote that he doesn't remember in this missing week of his life that's kind of leading him to doing that. So The Signal and The Writer are those 2 DLC episodes about him in the Dark Place trying to figure out what is going on. And that is where I think you can feel Remedy starting to sort of snap into place the sort of style they go for from then on into American Nightmare, Control, and then Alan Wake 2, where it is very kind of surreal and conceptual because you're playing through a dreamscape, like you're not playing through an actual literal physical reality. It's all this weird sort of strange surreal space that is remixing areas from the original game in kind of mind-bending ways. And one thing I do want to specifically mention, if people are seeking out and playing Alan Wake Remastered, it doesn't automatically move you into those 2 DLC episodes. You have to go to the mission select screen and pick them. I assume that's how it worked in the original game, but it is a thing that if you don't know that they're there, they'd be actually very easy to miss, but they're the best part of that game. So if people are playing Alan Wake Remastered, make sure that you go through the mission select screen and do those after you finish the main story. So Alan Wake 1, great game. Then I played Alan Wake's American Nightmare. This is an Xbox Live Arcade game, and for whatever reason, I mean, it is its own title, but so it's not included in Alan Wake Remastered. So if you want to play it, you have to do... The easiest way to play it is to do the backwards compatible version if you have an Xbox One or an Xbox Series. So I booted up my Series S. The 2 times I have played a game on my Series S was in January. I played Hi-Fi Rush, and then in December I played Alan Wake's American Nightmare. My year began and ended with the Xbox Series S, and I didn't play anything on it at all in any of the intervening months. But it's a nice thing to be able to boot it up on that and just do backwards compatible. Alan Wake's American Nightmare is a fascinating game because it is a game that feels like it is sort of really ahead of its time. If it came out now, it would 100% be a roguelite. But because it came out before that was a big trend, it's kind of has a lot of elements where you see it could have been a roguelike, but it's not quite. It is all set, again, Alan Wake is in the Dark Place, although American Nightmare is a little bit more kind of vague about he seemingly has escaped the Dark Place, but he clearly hasn't really, and he just doesn't realize that. And it's you playing through this thing of him fighting his evil doppelganger, Mr. Scratch, which is a again, kind of evil Cooper from Twin Peaks kind of thing, although this is well before you had that concept fleshed out in Twin Peaks: The Return. But Mr. Scratch is this evil doppelganger created by the Dark Place that is a manifestation of the sort of like subtext around Alan Wake as a character, which is he has all this kind of like anger and kind of this abusive side to him that he has repressed. That comes out as the sort of evil character, and he's fighting with him in American Nightmare through this kind of fictional town called Night Springs, which is the in-universe TV show that Alan Wake originally wrote for, that's like a fake Twilight Zone. So you're like fighting in this like fake Twilight Zone town, and you're going through these loops of every time you go through, there are kind of 3 big open map areas, and you go through them one at a time. And then once you finish the 3rd map, you then loop back around to the first map again, and have to redo those same objectives, but now with like a twist on them, and you go through that 3 different times. So that's the kind of like roguelike aspect, is that it's reusing a lot of the same maps, a lot of the same enemies, a lot of the same concepts, but it's remixing it, and there's a kind of time loop based story that it's going around. And yeah, that game is very good. It's short. I played it all in one sitting. It's about like 3 hours long to do the full thing. But Alan Wake's American Nightmare, that is definitely also an amazing game. And then I went on to Control, which I talked about at length in the podcast in 2019 when that game came out. But that game is fascinating to play the Ultimate Edition, because it puts it into perspective that Control is just a PS5 game that came out before the PS5 released, because it was so ahead of its time technically, and the PS4 was not really able to manage that game particularly well. If you played the PS4 version of Control, you might remember stuff like the game hitching up something awful every time you just brought up the map. Just like very simple things in that game would cause it to kind of crumble. And the PS5 version is great. There is a 30 frames per second ray tracing mode you can play. I think you want to play it at high frame rate, though, even though the ray tracing does look really good. It's one of the first games that ever used ray tracing, but it still is some of the best implementation of it, even on the PS5 that's not necessarily doing, turning all those features up to 11. The ray tracing looks fucking great. But playing that game at a high frame rate is... it totally changes the feel of that game, because it's such an action game that playing it at a high frame rate like really makes the combat shine in a way that I always enjoyed the combat. But here it's just some of the best third-person action combat in any game. It's phenomenal. And just, yeah, that game top to bottom is just kind of like a modern kind of cult classic in a proper fashion. I replayed through the DLC for it as well. And both of those are phenomenal. It is very fun to play the Alan Wake expansion, which was the second one, which I originally played through that without knowing anything about Alan Wake, and it was kind of fun to see it from that side and be like, what the fuck is all this crazy shadow, dark place, weird stuff? And then when you play it through and you've played all the Alan Wake games, it's fun to see that it still doesn't make sense because it's so mindfucky. But you know that it doesn't make sense because you're like, what? Like, for instance, there's one thing, this will kind of transition into Alan Wake 2, which is a fucking, just an incredible game, but it is an absolute mind-fucking game. There's a character in Alan Wake 1 named Thomas Zane, who was, as far as you know in that game, was a writer that preceded Alan Wake, who in the 70s did a lot of the same things that Alan Wake did. He discovered the Dark Place. He tried to use the powers of the Dark Place in order to try to save his wife. It didn't work. Things went wrong. And in order to stop it, Thomas Zane put himself into the Dark Place and then wrote himself out of existence. One of the fundamental powers of the Dark Place in Alan Wake is that any art, any like genuine, earnest art made under its influence alters reality to match that art. So that's the thing with Alan Wake as a writer. Under the influence and the power of the Dark Place, the things that Alan writes start to come true. And Thomas Zane seemingly did the same kind of thing. He sort of was erased partially from existence from his own writing. But a big kind of twist in Alan Wake is that the sort of MacGuffin that you use, that's almost literally a MacGuffin because it's a game about writing, that you use to defeat the Dark Place was created by Thomas Zane, seemingly in a way that implies that Alan Wake existing in the first place is kind of as a result of Thomas Zane's reality-altering powers. So the Alan Wake series is all about, like, what is reality, what was real, what was changed, can you tell the difference, is there a difference? And part of that is in the Alan Wake expansion, you see this whole insane conversation between Alan Wake and Thomas Zane. But now Thomas Zane is not an old writer from the 70s. He is a filmmaker who immigrated from Finland, because he's actually Thomas Sen, because Remedy is a Finnish game development studio, and they get more and more Finnish every game they make, which is amazing. And he was this like auteur filmmaker who created a movie called Tom the Poet, and that's what altered reality, and that's what makes you think that he's a writer, but you can't tell, was he always a film director and that the version we know was something from Alan Wake 1 that was altered, or is this a change that has now happened? And now also Thomas Zane is a doppelganger of Alan Wake, and you're like, I don't understand what's happening. And then Jessie Faden, the main character of Control, doesn't know what's happening because she thought that Thomas Zane was a poet, and now she's like, oh, Thomas Zane the poet. Oh, wait, no, that's right. He was an auteur filmmaker. I always get that mixed up. And you're like, what the fuck is even happening? And you don't understand. And that leads you into Alan Wake 2, which is just an absolute mindfuck of a game, and it's fucking incredible. Alan Wake 2 is definitely it's the game that Remedy has been trying to make the entire time. It is a game that so completely, I think, accomplishes the kinds of things that Remedy has been interested in doing, particularly narratively with their games, but are these really high concept elements that I think are very difficult to execute, and they've always done a really good job, but Alan Wake 2 just takes it to a very different level. So in Alan Wake 2, the story, broadly speaking, is about these two characters, Saga Anderson, who is a new character who comes to Bright Falls, the town from Alan Wake 1, to investigate a series of ritual murders that very quickly become connected to the disappearance of Alan Wake, which happened in universe in 2010 when the original game occurred. So you're playing some things from her perspective as she's investigating this case alongside the FBI agent named Alex Casey, who is the character from Alan Wake's detective novel series that made him famous in universe, who is also basically a fake version of Max Payne, because Remedy doesn't have the rights to Max Payne. Rockstar does. But Alex Casey is clearly just meant to be Max Payne. He's modeled to look like Max Payne. It is the same voice actor who, James McCaffrey, who tragically passed away very recently. He just passed away just a couple weeks ago, but it's an amazing performance. But so Alex Casey is her partner investigating these ritual murders, seemingly connected to the dark place in Alan Wake. While you're investigating that, you are also switching to Alan's perspective while he is in the dark place, trying to find a way to get out, while he's also kind of contending with his dark alter ego, Mr. Scratch. And so you are sort of blending these two different perspectives and these two different characters, the detective and the writer. And the way they explore the story and the sort of really strange mind-bending nature of the reality of that game, of like what is real, what has affected what do we believe, and how do we perceive reality, and how does that change what reality is. All of that stuff is so interesting, and the way that they explore it through game mechanics and the visual makeup of the game and all of that is phenomenal. And there's a lot of ways that they do it. Each character has a sort of special room that you access by pressing the touchpad. That's sort of a 3D representation of a menu, more or less. For Saga, she calls it her mind place, but it's like this lodge in a like old Northwestern kind of like tavern looking thing. And that's where you have a case board where you're putting together all the clues of the case. And it's literally like on a wall. As you get clues, you put up clues on this wall and connect them together with pieces of string. Like your classic, like, it's all connected kind of thing. And you're using that to piece together the nature of this case and all the weird things you're finding off to the side. So it uses that to sort of visually represent the process that she undergoes and how she investigates things. And then also she can, quote unquote, profile people, where she seemingly is able to get this sort of like deep insight into what people are thinking or what they believe, and like how she's able to do that's part of the plot. So you have that on one hand. And the Alan Wake side, you have the writer's room, which is, I think, literally where Alan Wake is actually meant to be the entire time, is he's just stuck in this one little room with a typewriter. When you press the touchpad, you go there. But you're generally playing through this sort of abstract representation of a film noir version of New York City, the kind of New York City that exists in his Alex Casey detective novels. and you're trying to sort of create these whole elaborate like murder stories in the dark place in order to try to create a scenario that will allow Alan to escape. And you need to create these sort of like dark, fucked up stories that are connected through sort of narrative logic in order for the kind of power of the dark place to make them real. And so what that means is you're investigating these cases effectively from the Alan Wake perspective, but you are making them worse. You are creating these kind of ritual murder cases in this fake version of film noir New York City that this fictional version of Alex Casey is investigating. So Alex Casey exists kind of in both realms of the story in a different way. And as you're doing that, you go back to your writer's room with the touch of the touchpad. And as you get different elements of the story you collect by exploring the environment, you can slot those into the story and it changes the world. So like if you go to this room, which is where the room where this murder that Alex Casey's investigating is meant to have happened. Well, the first time you enter it, it's just a totally plain room. Nothing has happened. But then Alan Wake gets inspiration for an idea of like, this would be the perfect place in this weird hotel room for the murder to have happened for Alex Casey to investigate it. So in order to make the story connect, you put that idea into the writer's board, and then the environment changes seamlessly. That now it's like, okay, this is not just a normal hotel room. The lights have gone red. There's a chair that is knocked over. There's blood all over the place. There's a message scrawled on the wall, and that has now changed the nature of the environment you're exploring, and you use that to solve puzzles and progress the narrative. And it's just a sort of incredible way of using these game mechanics to fully represent the ways that these two people see the world, how they interact with the world, and how they explore it based on their two perspectives. The person trying to sort of solve the truth and the person who is trying to create the mystery. And it is just a really amazing piece of game design that also is the most next-gen feeling game I think I have played. This is a game that feels like it is using things like the ability of the PS5 to load information very quickly in a incredibly creative way. Like the ability for you to just sort of snap into this whole other area in your writer's room or the mind place at the tap of a button, and it's completely seamless, is really impressive. The way that the environment changes in really dynamic and radical ways based on the things that you're doing also feel like something that would not have really been feasible on the PS4, especially when you're pushing really high quality, super high resolution like character models and stuff like that, because this is the best looking game I have played bar none. Like the character models in this game are incredible, and you can tell that they're incredible because the other thing this game does that is something that Remedy has been doing all along, but this just takes it to a whole other level, is blending live action footage with video game stuff. So Remedy has always been interested in doing weird little things like including a fake TV, in-universe TV show that is represented with live-action footage that, for instance, in Alan Wake, you see little tiny episodes of their fake Twilight Zone Night Springs, and those are these little live-action videos that play on the TV in the game. And that's like a cool little novelty, but it's not really doing much with the live action. When you get to Control starts doing things where they project the video onto the video in-game environment. So it's live action video that's projected into the environment and interacts with the environment in the way that a projector would in a very realistic fashion. And it creates a really cool, interesting aesthetic. And they use it to create these very kind of strange, very kind of surreal images where you're blending live action and video game stuff on top of each other. Alan Wake 2 goes so far with it, though, where there's they use that projection thing incredibly effectively and do that in different ways where they're blending live action and video game imagery together. But there are also just long stretches of live action footage that is incredibly well shot and well put together. Particularly in the Alan Wake side of things, because it's meant to sort of represent the very strange, bizarre, abstract world that Alan exists in. And so he will go into a room and look at a TV, and on the TV screen is a live action image of the Finnish actor that is the body actor of Alan Wake, and he's just staring into the camera, and you'll hold down X, and then your camera will go into the TV screen, and then now you're just watching this live action footage of Alan Wake on like a talk show called In Between with Mr. Door. And Mr. Door is a fantastic character, and he's getting interviewed on a fucking talk show, and you're just watching live action footage. There's some stuff they do with it. I don't want to really say that is very spoilery, but there's a whole kind of element they do with music that, if you've played the game, you know what I'm talking about. That is just one of the most insane and incredible things I've seen in a game, kind of bar none. There is an entire, like, probably maybe about 15-minute long in-universe auteur style art housey horror film that is like meant to be a horror film directed by Thomas Sen/Thomas Zane, called Yoten Yo, or The Nightless Night. And it is just like, you can just sit there and watch it. And it's just like 15 minutes long. You just watch it projected on a movie theater in the game, in the dark place. And it's actually like legitimately really good. And it captures the aesthetic of like a weird Finnish art housey horror film so well. And it's all the dialogue is in Finnish with actual Finnish actors, because there's a bunch of Finnish actors in the game, because it's set, or the developer is in Finland. And there's no subtitles, so you're just watching like Ahti the janitor, who is a character in the game. It was also a character in Control, and it's just the actual dude who I guess is a real like cool character actor in Finland, and he's just monologuing in Finnish for a couple minutes, and you're just watching that with weird fucked up camera angles. It's amazing. And then Sam Lake, the director, who was the face model for Max Payne in the original Max Payne 1, he is the body model and the mocap actor for the Alex Casey character in the game. And they have a lot of fun with the fact that this very meta, weird reality-bending game also has the director for Remedy as a physical body in the game, and they fuck around with that in different ways. And so he is, in the live action, in-universe, weird Finnish auteur horror film, he's the main character, because the main character is meant to be Alex Casey. And so it's just Sam Lake, the director of Remedy, doing all this weird shit in this weird Finnish horror movie. And it's incredible. So Alan Wake 2, top to bottom, just all-time great game. And then on top of that, it's a survival horror game, which is a big departure for Remedy. All their games up to this point are basically some like variant of a third-person action game. But Alan Wake 2, the clear biggest inspiration in terms of the gameplay is the Resident Evil 2 remake. It plays a lot like that kind of Resident Evil 2 remake, where you're exploring these sort of larger environments. You're trying to find enough sort of supplies and stuff to stay alive, managing your ammo, your batteries for your flashlight, all that kind of stuff. It's got this much sort of slower, very methodical pace, similar to the way that Resident Evil 2 remake kind of plays. And I think they do a great job, and it's a really smart choice moving to that from the action style of Alan Wake 1, because there was always a dissonance with the story of Alan Wake 1 is trying to be this kind of Stephen King-esque horror story, but the gameplay is you are this badass action dude running around with a revolver and a flashlight, fucking up weird shadow monsters. Here, it is like, oh god, these things are horrifying creatures that could kill me at any second, and I'm like desperately struggling to survive. And so that gameplay matches up much better. If there's any criticism I have for the game, it's only that relative to Resident Evil Remake 2 or Resident Evil 2 Remake, Alan Wake 2 does not have the same level of like super refined, precise design in terms of things like the placement of resources in combat encounter and stuff like that. It makes you appreciate just how good the design of Resident Evil 2 Remake is, because there's almost nobody else who even tries to make these sorts of games. So you don't have a lot of like other things to measure it by. It makes you realize how refined and how precise the design of that game is. To see a game like Alan Wake 2, I mean, doing a lot that that game doesn't do in terms of narrative. So I'm like, this is not really a criticism of Alan Wake 2. It's just like an observation. But like seeing another game trying to do some of those elements and seeing like, okay, yeah, there's a very precise relationship between the encounter design, where resources are placed in the environment and stuff like that. By the end of Alan Wake 2, I felt like I had way too many resources. And it was like, I was just sort of, without even trying to be sort of like, you know, scrunging around for stuff and being very sort of scrimpy with my resources, I still felt like I was just sort of drowning in stuff and had more stuff than my inventory could even fit, in a way that felt like it was a little bit unbalanced. I didn't necessarily play on the hardest difficulty level, so I don't know if that would change it. But that's literally like the only negative thing I have to say about Alan Wake 2. All of the narrative, the graphics, the art design, the fucking mood, the atmosphere, all of that is absolute A+, best in class. And it's like the gameplay stuff could be a little bit more refined. And I'm expecting, as with their earlier games, that when they do the DLC that they've announced that they're going to do, that those DLC chapters probably will hit that level, because that's kind of how the DLC worked in Alan Wake 1 and Control. The gameplay become much more refined because they're like used to using all these like systems in the engine and stuff. But yeah, the only problem with Alan Wake 2 is that stuff could have been tweaked just a little bit more, but everything else, this is like a fucking all-time great game, and people really need to play it.
Yeah, I would love to. I have not had time. Right at the moment, I'm at my parents' house, so I do not have my PS5 with me. Here's a question. I know everyone always asks this kind of thing. Do you need to have played the other Remedy games?
No, I don't think so. That's like one of the things that's very smart about Saga Anderson. She is fundamentally like the main character, I would say. She's the character that you start playing as, and the first several hours of the game is just you playing as her. Then eventually you unlock Alan's, like you play a chapter as Alan Wake while he's in the darkness, and then you have the ability to switch between the two characters. But I think one of the reasons why they created Saga Anderson, I think, was to solve that problem of like, it's been 13 years since Alan Wake 1. There's a lot of people who have not played that game. There's a lot of people who are now the age to play Alan Wake 2 who didn't play Alan Wake 1 because they were like 5 years old when that game came out, So it's just been such a long time. And I think it would actually be very interesting to sort of enter this without knowing a lot, and only having a vague sense of kind of what Alan Wake was about, because you'd be kind of putting it together with Saga as she's trying to solve that stuff. Because if you've played Alan Wake and know all that stuff, you play Control, you have like a good handle on the broader kind of Remedy universe, because this and Control are very much set in the same universe. You're kind of like looking on with this, like you're like Saga, you're like taking this little baby step into a very deep, dark, fucked up place that you don't know anything about. But if you're kind of unraveling it with her, I think that would be very interesting. And they definitely, I think, try to gradually introduce you into the concepts to make it more accessible to a newcomer. And in terms of the Control connections, all of those are more kind of like broadly in the world building. There's nothing that, like, the main character of Control, Jesse Faden, does not pop up in this game or anything like that. There's nothing sort of like a super big crossover. It's more that the Federal Bureau of Control, which is the entity, the bureau that is in Control and is kind of like this government agency, shadowy organization behind the scenes that deals with the paranormal. They are here in Bright Springs and they are Bright Falls, and they are, they have a presence in the story as a result of that. But every interaction they have with the story in Alan Wake 2 is all explained in the context of Alan Wake 2. And it's more just like a fun, I know all the weird bureaucracy of the FBC and how these weirdos operate. There is one really hilarious thing where there's a boss fight where you have to turn on these lights in order to fight the shadow monster, and the lights are set up by the FBC, and they're powered by these big orange cubes that in Control are these things you use your fucking telekinesis powers to lift up and solve like electric puzzles with, to like, I gotta open this door, so I gotta lift up this weird orange cube and launch it over there. And it is fucking hilarious to see these big weird orange cubes in Alan Wake 2 that the FBC still use to power these lights, but it's like you would never design them that way if it wasn't for the very different kind of game that Control is, that you need this big weird object that's brightly colored so the player can see it. So there are a lot of little things like that. If you play Control, you'll get kind of a laugh at seeing the FBC from this very different perspective. But it is not a thing where you need to have played Control in order to understand that side of the story. And I think they kind of introduce all the Alan Wake elements naturally in the story in such a way that you don't have to have played Alan Wake 1 to get into it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good to know. I think probably a lot of people had that question, because it is also like, I will say, I think I understood about 66% of what you were saying in that whole monologue. I think you did a very good job explaining this game. It just sounds like a game that is very difficult to explain. So
yeah, and I was like, I'm like desperately trying to edit myself to not even get into it's crazy. Like, yeah. It is definitely like, if you get into it, you will sound like an absolute maniac with your whole like corkboard with 1,000 pictures connected by your weird string, like your Saga Anderson. But just Randy is like, no, you don't understand. You see, it's Thomas Zane, and he's Tom the poet, but he's also Thomas Sin, and he's the Finnish filmmaker. And then there's Audie the janitor, who is the janitor of the Federal Bureau of Control. And your mind explodes. Because then it's also, but you have Matthew Peretta, who's the voice actor who plays Alan Wake, but he's also the body and voice actor of Dr. Darling from Control. And it's like, oh my God, and this is this madness. And then there's shit that I know is from Quantum Break, that I haven't played that game, and I looked up a little bit of it because I was like, I think this is that guy who is in Quantum Break, and there's a whole weird thing with that too that I don't even fully understand. But yeah, it's madness. But it's a madness you want to stare into. I people should play it. It's very good.
That sounds awesome. I have not been playing a ton of video games the last, honestly, couple of months. I've just been working on writing projects and watching a lot of movies for work things or for pleasure things. So I got to my parents' house maybe 5 days before Christmas, so just to stay here a couple weeks over the break here in Colorado. And one funny thing is, you know how Netflix introduced that whole fucking password sharing crackdown thing?
Yes.
So I just used my parents' Netflix account because I am a millennial. And so I just didn't have Netflix at my house this year in Iowa. And so I just, like, out of spite, stopped using Netflix because I was like, fuck you, I'm not paying for this shit. Even though Netflix started building up all this stuff I really wanted to watch this year. So, and I would keep, like, going to, it's like, I guess I'll just make my own account. And then I would see the price and I would, like, slam my laptop in horror. So anyway, my parents obviously have Netflix, so I'm here. And I've been watching a lot of Netflix. One of the things, let's see, I've got a lot I could go through here. The one thing I did want to mention, because it's brand new, it came out from when we're recording this just yesterday, and I watched the whole thing in one sitting because it's very short. But Pokémon is obviously Netflix, if you don't know, in America, airs all the Pokémon stuff now. And they have this new show, Pokémon Concierge, that is their stop-motion animated little Pokémon. Like, I want to call it an OVA, because in another lifetime it would have just, it's about 45 minutes total, split into 4 episodes. It very much feels like in another life it would have just been a single volume OVA release kind of thing. But it's really lovely. I loved it particularly because it's my favorite flavor of Pokemon animation, which is the Pokemon hanging out and being cute, right?
Yes.
Like my favorite parts of the Pokemon movies were always the Pikachu shorts before them, because it's just a Pokemon hanging out and doing cool Pokemon shit, but like not battling, just like doing other Pokemon stuff. And that's what Pokemon Concierge is. It's about this girl who, it's effectively the plot of Stardew Valley. She just is like so upset with modern life that she decides to go live on a remote island, and it happens to be full of a big Pokemon resort, and she gets a job there as the Pokemon Concierge. And so I guess that part is not like Stardew Valley. But anyway, and it's just, she's hanging out. She helps a Psyduck out. Psyduck is such an awesome Pokemon, and he looks really cute in stop-motion animation. It is utterly gorgeously animated because it is incredibly tactile. It's all the Pokemon made as puppets with, like, felt. It reminds me, like, Disney Channel used to do much cheaper versions of this in the 90s with some of their shows. Like, Winnie the Pooh had one that was kind of like this. Forgetting what other shows they did that with. But it was cool to see these, like, classic animated characters in, like, puppetry instead of hand-drawn animation. And it's just gorgeously done. It's the kind of thing where it's very light. It's not a lot of plot. It kind of feels like a pilot for a longer project, and I don't know if there will be much more. Obviously, this kind of thing is so ludicrously time-consuming and expensive to make. It would be, you're not going to make the Pokemon anime version of this, which airs every week for 20 years, right? But it was fun to watch. The other notable thing I just have to say about it is the first piece of Pokemon media to come out in Japanese in the United States officially, because Pokemon has always been dubbed on Netflix. Netflix, you can pick whatever language you want for almost anything, but the Pokemon anime, it's English. The Japanese version of the Pokemon anime, the Pokemon movies, has never, ever, ever been distributed here. This defaults to Japanese.
I wonder if that's because it's probably a slightly different edit as well, right? So it's probably not, you can't just do a different track.
Well, no, I know.
They have changed it.
Right, but I'm just saying, like, they haven't even done alternate versions or put the Japanese version on Crunchyroll or something. Like, the Pokemon Japanese version has just never been distributed. And it is interesting, the Pokemon Concierge, which has some very good voice actors in it, and it's fun to hear. But it was just interesting to me, like, even to the level of the subtitles are subtitled for the Japanese track. They changed the Pokemon names to English because the Pokemon names are so different. I think fans just kind of need to see like who that is. But otherwise, like I was just listening, like, oh, that must be different in the dub. I didn't go over and check the dub, but it even, when you go to their language list, it says Japanese original. And it was kind of like, man, I've been a Pokemon fan for most of my life. It is kind of amazing. In 2023, we finally, at the very end of 2023, have an official Japanese Pokemon anime release. Maybe more to come? Probably not, but it's cool to see.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect it. The one thing you always know, you're still getting the same Pikachu. Can't change that.
Did you know? So I've also been watching. They have the normal Pokemon anime on there, and they put up the last batch of Ash Ketchum episodes that aired last year in Japan, and I've been watching those dubbed, and I'm fine watching the Pokemon dub because I watched it as a kid, and the voices, it's the second gen cast, but I was still watching when that came in, so I remember some of those voices. But in the credits now of like Pokemon, Ikue Otani has her own card. Nobody else in the show has it. Like, if you watch the end credits, there are just these massive walls of credits for all the animators, all the Japanese voice actors or English voice actors are on one slide, but it just stops for a second, and in the middle of the screen says, Voice of Pikachu, Ikue Otani. She gets the only solo card in the credits, and I think that's kind of fucking baller. What other Japanese voice actor has their own credit in the dub of the show, just always there on their own?
Like, she should just blackmail the Pokemon company. Just be like, just say, it's like, I'm just not going to do the Pikachu thing anymore unless you paid me 500 billion yen. And they're like, well, shit, we've got to do it. You can't make Pokemon without Pikachu. And then she just becomes the richest woman in the world.
It is amazing. And that is the fun thing about Pokemon dubbed. You're right. You always get Pikachu is in every episode. Even the new show that they've started that doesn't have Ash, there's Captain Pikachu in it. And that's still Ikue Otani. She's never leaving.
Yep, she has a death grip on the Pokemon franchise, and that's the way I want it.
It's amazing. But anyway, I watched that. Let's see. In terms of anime, I also just wanted to praise, I saw the Scott Pilgrim anime that came out last year. I normally do not call American-produced animation things anime, but this is properly an anime. It was made by Science Saru in Japan. Other than the writers are American, like every creative lead on that show is someone from Science Saru, which is cool to see.
Yeah, it's kind of like that Cyberpunk Edge Runners thing.
Right.
Like, we're getting more of these projects that have a like sort of they do have some top level creative involvement from a Western sort of studio or Western creators, but fundamentally it is an animated project. Yes. Like Star Wars Visions is the same general kind of thing.
Yes, absolutely. Some of the same people from Visions worked on this. It's really cool. I like Scott Pilgrim versus the World, the Edgar Wright movies. I read the comics way back in the day. I liked them. This is great, though. This is like, it does a fun thing where the first episode is basically what you remember from the beginning of the Scott Pilgrim movie or comics, but with some of the jokes replaced and kind of modernized. Like Ramona Flowers now is delivering DVDs for Netflix. She's not working for Amazon, which is what she's doing in the movie, which I thought was a funny touch because this is on Netflix. But other than that, it's the same. And then at the end of the episode, Scott Pilgrim disappears. They think he's dead. And then Ramona is your main character trying to figure out what happened to him. And it goes through a completely different run of the story. And it's very fun. The big pleasure for me was, the animation is extraordinary. I love everything I've seen from Science Saru. They're the studio that Masaki Yuasa started, and his stuff comes out of there. They've done some other exciting stuff recently. And it is just... there's something about their style, which is that, Masaki Yuasa kind of very rounded, distorted, deformed kind of look that fits really well with the Brian Lee O'Malley art from the comics, and so it all just looks great. It has a really nice soundtrack that is Joseph Trapanese and the chiptune artist Amanaguchi, who did the Scott Pilgrim video game that people loved back in the day from Xbox Arcade, and so it's got a really cool soundtrack. And then the big thing for me is, again, it's Netflix. You can pick whatever language you want. It has an English dub by the actors who were in the Edgar Wright movie, which is cool that they got them. But I just switched over to Japanese because the Japanese cast for this thing is even more loaded with stars. It's Hiro Shimono as Scott Pilgrim. He is Zenitsu from Demon Slayer and a bunch of other things. But this is very much a Zenitsu from Demon Slayer performance, and it's tremendous. He is such a good Scott Pilgrim. Pharaoh's Eye as Ramona Flowers, who is kind of a up-and-coming star. She's also one of the main characters in Pokemon Concierge.
Yeah. File's Eye is great. She's Jocelyn. She's the JoJo in the most recent animated JoJo part. She's been in a lot of stuff recently because she was in that weird, horny workout show, which is you will know what that show is. I can't remember the title. It's got a ridiculous title. It's actually pretty good. It's a funny show that is good at actually teaching you some basics of exercise. And I think that was like her big breakout hit. And she's been in a lot of stuff since then. Yeah, I really like her.
Yeah, she's a great Ramona. Tomokazu Seki, Kana Hanazawa, Yuichi Nakamura, Shinsuke Takeuchi. Aoi Koga is Knives Chow, and she is just doing full Paimon as Knives, which works perfectly. Some actors that are newer, like my favorite performance in the whole thing was their version of young Neil is a newer actor named Yuto Kawasaki, and he is fucking hilarious. I hope he's in a lot more stuff in the future. Yeah, it's a tremendous Japanese cast. Because the show is anime as fuck, you need actual anime voice actors. I did listen to some parts of it with the dub. I don't know if you would call it a dub, but the English actors, and like, they are good actors, but none of those people in that movie are voice actors, like Chris Evans or Michael Cera. And they're also not anime voice actors, so they're kind of 2 levels removed from what the actual style of the show demands. And so if you just want continuity from the movie, the dub is fine. But I do just have to say that Japanese cast is so good. And it's so good, it actually made me realize how completely miscast Michael Cera is in that part. Because Michael Cera does the sort of like wallflower, very shy, sad boy kind of thing. And that's not really who Scott Pilgrim is or is written as. And I think it makes the character feel very toxic in the movie in a way he's not supposed to. And having Hiro Shimono do it was kind of revelatory for me of like, oh, that's what this character is supposed to sound like. This is interesting. So I had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, I mean, you just have certain advantages with the Japanese dub, just in terms of like the model they use. Of like, I can't assume that they have put like, Chris Evans and Michael Cera were not in the room together while they were recording and stuff like that. But that is the standard of how you dub stuff in Japanese. So yeah, there's just it's a country that has to do this kind of stuff and has like a very complex whole developed entire industry around it. So yes, like the dubbing stuff, particularly for an anime, is you're going to get some high quality stuff that you're not necessarily going to get even if the original script was written in English.
Yeah, it's like, Chris Evans is cool. We all like Chris Evans. I'm sorry, Yuichi Nakamura is cooler. He just is. He's got a better voice. Like, Chris Evans can look cool in real life, but his voice is not Yuichi Nakamura's voice. So if you want that character, I'm not going to buy that Yuichi Nakamura is not the better one. I'm sorry.
That's actually hilarious because Nakamura is the dub actor for Captain America in the Marvel movies over Chris Evans. So I think
that's why they picked him, but yeah.
Yeah, but that is like very... I didn't even think about that.
Yes.
But yeah, that's very good.
Yeah, I watched a bunch of other Netflix stuff, including stuff that I was having to catch up on for my top 10, like the new David Fincher movie, the Wes Anderson Roald Dahl shorts that came out. You can read about those on my top 10 list. What else have I watched this week? I finally, on Christmas Day, remembered that I had not yet seen the Kaguya-sama movie that came out last year. I
haven't watched it yet either.
It's good. It was a fun Christmas watch. I watched it with my brother who had already seen it, but he watched it again with me. It's Kaguya-sama, The First Kiss That Never Ends. It's 4 episodes on Crunchyroll. I'm actually super fascinated with how that aired in theaters because it's built as 4 episodes. It doesn't quite feel like an edit the way like the Mugen Train arc of Demon Slayer was edited, and as far as I can tell, even in Japan on Blu-ray, it was distributed as 4 episodes, so I don't know that the theatrical edit even exists for you to go find, but it's all there. It's very good. I really enjoyed that, and kind of kicks the story in a very different direction for whatever future seasons they do. What else have I been up to, Sean? I have been in a weird Shakespeare mode, where I have been... I on the drive out here, I was listening to snippets of a Hamlet audiobook on YouTube because there was some part of Hamlet I wanted to go back to and hear, and that got me into it. And then David Tennant was on the brain because of Doctor Who, and so I was watching his version of Hamlet from 2009, and that was so good that I went out to the Barnes & Noble near me and grabbed like a new copy of that because I cannot find my old books here at this house because it's 2 moves removed from wherever I was when I had that book. And I've been going through that, and I've been downloading other versions of different Shakespeare plays. So I've just been in this is holiday break, and I'm going to go where my mind takes me mode. Yeah,
hey, I'm into it. I like randomness. Because I've been doing some anime stuff. Obviously, we've been doing Japanimation Station, so I've been watching things for that. But one thing I think you realize when you're doing a season on KyoAni is every once in a while you have to watch something that's not animated by KyoAni to sort of adjust your perspective, because it's like you forget how special it is, especially once you get into the stuff they make in like 2008 onwards. Like once you get to Clannad and after that, it's like the animation's at such a different fucking level. I've been watching some good stuff. A couple of things I want to shout out. I watched... This is actually from a couple of years ago, but it just had been on my watch list forever. A show called Summertime Rendering, or Summertime Render, depending on which English or Japanese title you go for. This is from a few years ago. It's a time loop kind of thriller story about the main character, who's voiced by Hanae Natsuki, so you know you're in good hands there. He's this teenage boy who left his sort of remote island village that he lived in Japan to go attend a culinary school in Tokyo. He comes back home to his remote island village because his childhood friend / kind of adopted sister, Ushio, has drowned. And so he's coming back to sort of like for her funeral. And then once he gets there, all these sort of weird things start happening. It seems like instead of drowning, she was potentially strangled. And then he starts encountering these doppelgangers of people on the island, and learns that there's this myth about shadows on the island, that when you see a doppelganger, they will kill you and replace you. And those doppelgangers are called shadows. Through the process of that, in the first episode, the main character is killed, and then he loops back to being on the ferry coming into the island with all of his memories. And the story kind of develops from there. It's a very, very good time loop thriller because it knows how to evolve its premise, because it's a full 24 episodes. It's 2 full cores. But it changes in really interesting ways as it goes along, in ways I don't want to spoil, because part of the fun of it is kind of unraveling the mystery. Unfortunately, it's not. I don't think it's streaming on anything. I had jumped around to different services for a while. I don't think it's on anything right now because I had to go pirate it.
What, Sean? You bastard! How could you?
Actually, it might be on. Is it on Hulu now? Did it jump to Hulu? That might be where it's at now. I don't have Hulu, so
that's okay. You should pirate it instead of using.
I have a moral distaste for anything that asks me to pay for it, but then it'll still give me ads. I say, go fuck yourself. That's my attitude. Everything
now, Sean, other than maybe Crunchyroll. But
I mean, hey, I'm telling everything to go fuck itself. That's my attitude right now. But but Summertime Render, that's very good, especially if you're in the mood for that kind of thriller. On Crunchyroll, I watched... fucking titles for anime are the hardest thing to remember. It's like my love for Yamada-kun is level 999, something like that. If you Google Yamada 999, it will come up. But it is a shoujo anime. So, it's not usually my kind of... It's not a genre I'm super deep into.
Crunchyroll calls it My Love Story with Yamada-kun at level 999.
Thank you, Jonathan. As I hope you can see, it's a hard title to remember, especially when, the problem with my brain is I half remember what the title is in Japanese, and I half remember what the title is in English and how it was translated, and so I can't remember the title at all, other than a few of the key words. But it's it's sort of standard in terms of as a shoujo romance anime, but it's very well executed. It's animated by Madhouse. The director of it has done a couple of other shows like this that I like a show called Ore Monogatari, or My Love Story. That's a title that's very easy to remember. But yeah, I would especially recommend it if you're someone who's never really watched this genre of shoujo romance, by which I mean a romance anime that is targeted towards a female demographic. I think this is a good one as an entry point into that genre, because it's a genre that has lots of great classics. Again, I'm not necessarily an expert on it, but it's something I like to check out every now and then. This show had gotten pretty good buzz, and it finished recently. It's 13 episodes. It's 13 episodes, and it ends in a really good spot. It's not if they don't make a second season, there's plenty of places for the story to go. They found a really good place for the season to end, and I really appreciated that, because it felt very satisfying. If they don't make more, I won't feel bad about it, or I'm missing out on something. But it's a very sort of straightforward love story about this girl who is a college student, which is nice that she's a little bit older than your kind of typical high school protagonist that you usually get for a series like this. And she, in the first episode, gets dumped by her longtime boyfriend because he met this other girl in his online MMO game that he also kind of persuaded the main character to get into. And so he leaves her. And so the main character is kind of dejected in the first episode. She ends up going to this MMORPG event for that game, partially as a way to show herself off because she thinks her ex-boyfriend is going to be there and be like, aha, look, I'm doing fine without you kind of thing, even though she's not doing fine because she's like emotionally devastated by it. And then when she's there, she bumps into Yamada-kun, who is of course the main sort of like love interest of the show, who is this high school senior, so he's a little bit younger than her, who is also a professional gamer. And he's this very kind of listless, remote, kind of cold, aloof person. But obviously inside he's got a heart of gold and all that kind of stuff. Sort of a standard character setup. But they bump into each other, and then their kind of love story blossoms from there, both in the game and then out of the game. And it's just a very, very well done series. The characters are incredibly well acted and well written. They feel very real and very genuine, which is to me like sort of the thing that a series like this needs to do to be really successful. Is it needs to make you really believe in the people at the center of it and in their relationship, and that their relationship is interesting and compelling and brings something out in both people. And there's something about the little age gap between the two characters, that she's a little bit older, but is at a very different stage in life, because they're only like a year or two apart in age, but a high school senior and a first year in college is very different stages in their development as people. But she also is sort of scatterbrained and stuff like that, whereas he is younger, but he also is very kind of cold and logical. And so their relationship has a very compelling dynamic there. And then the supporting cast of characters, which is mostly other people in the guild in their game, they're also all very kind of vibrant and interesting. And you can definitely tell that in the manga, I assume eventually you start having little side love stories with the sort of supporting characters, which is a standard setup for this kind of series. But the first season is very laser focused on the main couple. And it's very well done. It's super well directed. It's animated very nicely. Not as nicely as a Kyoto animation thing. And that's one of those things where you realize, how much good direction carries an anime series that has much more limited animation, which again, I'm not saying limited animation relative to anything other than KyoAni, because KyoAni is just at such a different level, and it's pretty wild once you watch like anything else. So that show is very, very good. And then I also watched, this is a show that probably need a recommendation because it's so popular right now, but Oshinoko, which is also by the mangaka who created Kaguya-sama. This is the thing he did while he wrapped up Kaguya-sama and then moved on to. But this is a story, basically, trying to explain it is very difficult. But the general gist of it is that it's about the entertainment industry and the sort of like fucked up shit that happens behind the scenes. It involves a kind of murder mystery with the two main characters investigating the death of this idol, Hoshino Ai, who dies, and they're trying to sort of like uncover what happened about it. And there's a more involved premise beyond that. That's too much to kind of get into, but it's a very, very well done series. The only thing about it is that it unlike the Yamada-kun anime, it does not end at a very like satisfying spot. They're making a second season, so I think that they probably realized, we don't need to try to contort anything to make for a good landing spot. But it's definitely a series that ends and you're like, it feels like you're supposed to just be able to go on to the next episode, because it's adapting an ongoing series. And again, they are making a season 2. But it's incredibly well done. It is just a great kind of like thriller, again, a sort of thriller story that's a lot lighter in tone, but it's really about exploring these different stories about these productions behind the scenes. Each arc is kind of themed around a different kind of product, whether it's we're trying to establish an idol group, we're making, my favorite section of the show is there's a multi-episode arc about one of the main characters being cast on a reality dating show. The two main characters are both high schoolers, and one's an actor, one is the aspiring idol. And so the actor boy is cast in this reality TV dating show, and it really gets into the weeds about like the creation of those shows, the relationship between the cast and the crew, how they can manipulate these like impressionable young actors who are all, very skilled, smart people because they're all been working since they were children, but they're all children. And so they can be manipulated and emotionally hurt. It deals with like the reaction that people have with online criticism and stuff like that with these sorts of series. So yeah, if you're someone who's particularly interested in that, in the behind the scenes of the entertainment industry, particularly that like factory style entertainment industry, like pop music, like reality TV, and those sorts of like the seedy shit that goes on behind the scenes, it doesn't sort of pull its punches. It really gets into that stuff, and it's very interesting. And the first episode in particular is phenomenal. The first episode is basically a movie. It's 90 minutes in length, and if you watch it, you will understand why it has to be that long, because the show has a fairly involved premise that, again, I didn't get into all of the details of that here, but one of the reasons it took me a little bit to start watching the show is that I just need to set aside a good chunk of time to watch the whole first episode. But they made the right choice in making it a movie-length episode, and it is a really phenomenal series. I'm very excited to finally get into season 2 when that eventually airs. I think in 2024 is when it's supposed to come out.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've been meaning to also watch Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 and Spy Family Season 2, which I have not had time to watch while they were airing because we've been watching 45 billion Kyoto Animation shows.
Yes.
But I had that same feeling, Sean, when I went to Kaguya-sama Love is War, which is a well-animated show. No one would ever accuse that of not being a well-made show, right? But it was going from K-On! Is what we just finished, which you'll hear those episodes in January and February, to Kaguya-sama. I'm like, oh man, this looks like a slideshow next to Kyoto Animation. And again, I feel bad saying that because it's a well done show. It's Kaguya-sama Love is War. It has so much good stuff in it, but it is like not every single follicle of hair is moving independently.
Yes.
It's this crazy. It's crazy. It's still obviously a great show, but this is praising KyoAni more than putting down anyone else.
Yeah, it is just but it's why you need to adjust your perspective, because when all you're doing is just watching KyoAni show after KyoAni show, you lose perspective on, oh right, nothing else looks like this. It's pretty wild. And again, there can be great shows, and a show is not the quality of the show is not determined by how many frames of animation it has. That obviously helps and stuff like that. It adds to the aesthetic, but all of these are still really good series. But man, it really makes you realize how much of a league in its own KyoAni really is when you watch anything that's outside that wheelhouse, basically.
Yes. Anyway, we got off on a KyoAni tangent, or an anime tangent. The only other thing I had on my list to say, I was, like I said, I haven't been playing a ton of video games. I finished Mario RPG. That game rocks. I've been playing... I got the Pokemon bug in me because basically I play Pokemon games when I'm at my parents' house for the holidays. It's just been a tradition for years now. So I did get the DLC for Pokemon Violet. I've been playing that. I'm enjoying it very much. There's a ton of Pokemon to catch, so I'm happy. It's got a cool little story. It still runs like garbage, but if you can look past that, again, I will contend still with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. If you play it in handheld mode and you don't mind that when there are people around, the frame rate tanks, it's fine. It's a good Pokemon game. It's not broken. It's not crashing constantly. There's not game-breaking bugs. I don't know what engine they were using and how it worked on the Switch, because it is not like a graphically ambitious game. It's a very weird scenario. I still like it a lot, and I'm enjoying the DLC. Also, the music slaps. There is so much good, electric bass work in the music for that soundtrack for the DLC, and I fucking love it. It slaps.
You see, the thing is, though, Jonathan, it's the low frame rate's not because the game engine is pushing it too hard or anything like that. It's an artistic choice to match the aesthetic of the stop motion show. So it's just meant to look a bit like stop motion, so that's why it's very framey. That's all.
The stop motion show is so much more fluid than Pokemon Violet. I will say that. Oh man, I wish Psyduck moved with that kind of fluidity in Pokemon Violet. That'd be great. No, I'm still enjoying it. And again, there's something about me going home for the holidays, bringing my Switch with me, and just grinding through Pokemon. That's how I enjoy those games now. And it's a fun, because they tend to come out at the holidays. They tend to be Thanksgiving releases, and I think they know people enjoy them in this way. And I think that's why they maximize that kind of release time of the year. Pokemon, it'd be wrong to play it in March. It's just not when you play Pokemon games.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyway. All right. Sean, you want to talk some Doctor Who?
Let's talk about some Doctor Who.
All right, so as we promised, we're going to talk about the Christmas special, The Church on Ruby Road, written again by Russell T. Davies, directed by Mark Tonderai, who last directed on the show with The Ghost Monument and Rosa, which are two terrible episodes of Doctor Who, and I have to say I'm glad he got this consolation prize with a very good episode that I also think is very well directed. It shows you how much the showrunner does have influence over those things.
Yes. Yeah, because, those are not the worst directed episodes of that era, but they're not neither of those are some of the actually well-directed episodes of that year, which did have some of those. But yes,
the Ghost Monument, I remember, has some, like, that's where I started noticing the editing things. The editing in that episode is awful.
Yeah, because there are multiple people behind the scenes on the new era of Doctor Who that are from the Chibnall years that have stayed on, or they brought on to Bad Wolf, but they are all doing much better work.
Yes.
Including Mark Tonderide, yes. It shows you that, the showrunner does a lot of things, and some of that is that kind of overall management of the general production, meaning that, no matter how good you are, you can only do so good as what you are enabled to do by the system that you are a part of.
That's why movies have producers.
Exactly.
Producers do important work. They're not just studio heads. They're people on the ground doing the work. So anyway, this episode is another, like, oh my god, they've got Disney money. But no, the big event here obviously is our first full episode with Ncuti Gatwa as the 15th Doctor. And more significantly, because we did have a good chunk of Ncuti Gatwa in the last episode, we meet Millie Gibson as Ruby Sunday, who is our new companion and is the youngest companion of the modern era. She is only 19 years old now. She would have been even younger when they shot this. And she was born in 2004, 1 year before Modern Who began. I think we need to stop calling it Modern Who, Sean. Someone was born, grew up to adulthood, and is now on the show as a star. I don't know. It's a 20-year-old show. We're reaching where Classic Who had the 5 Doctors. It's crazy.
Yes, now we have to do, this is just Doctor Who. We have the original RTD era is now old Doctor Who.
Yes.
We're currently just in Doctor Who, and then the classic series is either you can call it the classic Doctor Who or ancient Doctor Who.
Yes.
Either of those work.
It's crazy. I also have to say something that I discovered a few months ago that has torn me apart, which is that Ncuti Gatwa is the first Doctor who is younger than me. He was born on October 15th, 1992, exactly 1 week after me. So he's only 1 week younger. But he is. Sean, you are delayed from this because you're about a month younger than me and Ncuti here. So you still can say the Doctor is older than you. You'll get here eventually, but I am facing this existential conundrum. It's delayed for you at least a little bit.
Yeah, you're an old fucker, aren't you? just a decrepit, bag of fucking bones on this podcast. I have to hold it together with my youth and vigor, while you're just this useless fucking ancient decaying entity in the corner.
Okay, I feel like we're getting off track. What did you think of the Church on Ruby Road?
It's very good. It's an incredibly fun episode that I think does a good job of setting up a lot of stuff. Like, it is able to set up both, obviously, Ncuti Gatwa as our 15th Doctor. It's able to set up Ruby Sunday, but also I think more importantly to me is it sets up a general kind of tone and style it feels like RTD is going for that you felt in some of the specials, but I feel like he kind of planted his flag and giggle with bringing the Toymaker back, and this episode is about sort of the follow through on that, of that he's pushing Doctor Who into the territory of like proper fantasy, because that's what this is. I think it is incredibly notable that the enemies in this episode are goblins. They are not aliens that are like goblins. They're just fucking goblins. And at no point is anything done to try to sort of explain that as anything aside from them being goblins. Now, these are like specific goblins that, can shift through time and cause bad luck. And arguably, they really should be called gremlins because that's more of a gremlin thing than a goblin thing. But whatever, they want to do the goblin baby joke. But it's really interesting to me that they're going that direction. I think it really pulls it off, and I like the sort of like style they're going for with integrating more straightforwardly fantasy elements, but having the Doctor have to interpret those. And I think all of that stuff is clearly them setting up what they're interested in doing with the season we're going to be getting into in the spring.
Yeah, I definitely love that too. I mean, it opens up on a production design level cool stuff. Like that ship that they are on, the Goblin ship, for what I think is easily the highlight of the episode, which is the big scene aboard the ship where he's interpreting the rope and we get the big musical number and everything, is such a delight. It's a kind of set that, like, you would usually get maybe in a historical episode of Doctor Who, but not in a kind of present day one where the aliens are kind of coming in. And so it is this fantasy ship where they're using the rope technology, and the Doctor is so fun to watch. The 15th Doctor having so much fun in like encountering these creatures that their logic is very alien to him, so he's trying to put it into terms that he can understand and then tell it to Ruby Sunday, and all of that is just a blast. This one is kind of like the Star Beast episode on steroids in terms of all the creature effects, because the goblins look great. They're very disciplined about when you are in a close-up, it is some kind of animatronic. And obviously for further away shots, they'll have more CGI things, but even those look very good because they're very much based on modeling. The Goblin King is 100, I don't know if he's 100% animatronic. I think there's CGI around the edges of him, but there's an animatronic base to him whenever you're looking at him, and that looks super cool. Definitely this was a one of those episodes that just feels, you can feel the production design value and money behind it in a really cool way.
Yeah, it's honestly crazy to me that at this point, you know, Doctor Who, which has typically been kind of a punching bag in terms of its special effects going back to the classic series, because, you know, the BBC didn't have Star Trek money, and Star Trek didn't have Ultraman money, but nobody in America knows fucking Ultraman, so they don't talk about that. But Ultraman looks better than any of these things. Ultraman still looks better than any of these things, partially because it was shot on film. Yeah. But, you know, Doctor Who always had a lot of heart, but it didn't have a lot of money. So the special effects often suffered, but that's part of why we love them. And that continued through to the modern series, right? Like the modern series still struggled with that stuff in terms of, you know, the RTD Moffat era. And honestly, like the Chibnall era, if the art design was better, they had honestly pretty good effects work most of the time. It's just what the effects work was trying to achieve was often very ugly, unpleasant designs, like the model set for the TARDIS. But here with the RTD stuff, and it was true in the other specials, but I think it does particularly feel like it here with the sequence on the ship, the goblins, the Goblin King, all that stuff. This is like the best fucking effects work of like a TV show. I don't watch a lot of modern TV, but if I'm thinking about like the other stuff on Disney Plus, like I think some of the effects work stuff here is more impressive than some of the stuff I see on like the fucking Mandalorian, or it's at least at that level. And that's crazy. Like Doctor Who has never been anywhere close to being competitive with the best effects on TV in terms of like sci-fi fantasy. And it's absolutely there with this episode. Like those goblins and the effects work there is absolutely fucking outstanding.
It is, and I would absolutely, Mandalorian is tougher because it's more ambitious in terms of how many effects it has to have. Like Doctor Who can fall back on the existing TARDIS set, or have Ruby and her family in the apartment, and there's no effects in those scenes or something, right? And the Mandalorian, Baby Yoda's there the whole time, but it's a lot better than the Marvel stuff. The compositing and everything is better than that. Absolutely. And just like creature effects, like, man, I think House of the Dragon, the Game of Thrones prequel spin-off, started doing some of this, but you realize how much base Game of Thrones needed to do more animatronic stuff with the dragons when you see like creatures like this, because it's just like you need something that they can reach out and touch in some scenes. If Ncuti Gatwa was doing a big musical number across a big Goblin King, he needs to be looking at something. There needs to be something in the shot with him, and you have that here, and it helps. And yeah, it is impressive. The show, these 4 episodes that we got in 2023, it's kind of incredible the leap Doctor Who has made, because there are isolated episodes of classic or modern Who that you can point to as like they really pulled something special off here, like A Heaven Sent or something, where like it was conceptual and big and they pulled the money together enough. Or The Doctor's Wife is one where famously they took money from every other episode that season so they can make that one work. And like you'll have those, but this is just 4 episodes that are all like kind of A+ on, for TV at least, the effects stuff.
Yeah, and it's just like, for me, you don't have to put on the like goggles or something to look at it and like appreciate it. You don't have to sort of excuse anything about it or look past anything. It's just the effects achieve, I think, 100% what they are trying to achieve. And that's what you're asking for from visual effects. Like when I look at the goblins, I don't have any disconnect when I'm looking at them. It's like, yeah, those are goblins. Like I obviously logically know the process, because I know enough about how these things are made. I know logically the process that was done with the combination of physical props and CGI enhancements and stuff that they do and all that. but like my brain just accepts it. My brain just accepts what I'm looking at, just accept the Goblin King and that it's there and that it exists in this universe, that it's interacting with things in the way it does. Same with the giant flying wooden pirate ship and all that stuff. And so the effects just do what they do, and I don't kind of cringe when I look at it the way that, if I'm watching Rose from 2005 and there's the whole, like some of the plasticky effects there's a shot in there of Mickey getting eaten by a trash can that is just like, oh my God. You look at you really have to excuse a lot to accept the effect you just saw. You have to look past certain things. And I'm happy you look past it because I don't care that much, but you have to. Here, there's nothing that's like that. And there's a lot of effects in this episode, and they're all so good.
I mean, that scene on the ship, that surpasses the scene in The Star Beast for complexity of what is going on.
Yes.
Because you have a bajillion goblins dancing around. You have a full musical number with a band of goblins who are partially animatronic there. They're CGI assisted, but they existed on a set, who are singing like they're a fucking Chuck E. Cheese band. It's incredible the amount of stuff that is going on in that scene, and to pull it all together the way they do, it's wild. And the finale at the church where he pulls down the goblin ship onto the spire of the church also looks amazing. That's a much more CGI assisted sequence, but it is very good. I mean, that's the right use of CGI. That is an image that would be very hard to do otherwise, and so I think they did it right. And it all creates these scenarios also where it's not just about the effects, but the actors are getting to bounce off of those things. We're getting to have fun. It feels like a big Christmassy kind of event episode in that way. It's a blast. It was you get through the musical number in this one, and you're like, man, we are in a different era of Doctor Who. This is something else. Russell T Davies, you remember, because he's the guy who brought Doctor Who back, he really had to scrimp and save in those early seasons with David Tennant and Chris Eccleston. They were a little resource poor in the early days of modern Who, and it's kind of amazing to have him come back around and be like, now I got the keys to the kingdom. We can do whatever the fuck we want. And there's a joy to it that I love.
Yeah, and you're not limited by the BBC, right? You have his own production company, Bad Wolf, that's handling that stuff. And so you just have the sense of like Doctor Who is sort of grown outside of this cage that it was stuck in for a very long time. A cage that multiple times tried to actively kill Doctor Who. Yes. And now, it's sort of free to do very different things and execute a different kind of vision. And I just think it's, the show right now has its its finger on the pulse of special effects and where special effects have been trending towards. And it's like riding that wave with the way it's blending prosthetics and animatronics and puppetry with its CGI work to incredible results. And this episode is more than anything else. It's just incredibly fun to watch because I obviously watched it on Christmas Day, and I watched it earlier today for the podcast.
Me too.
Rewatched it, and I was just like, even though it's basically an hour long, it just flew by. And it is just, I think the effects work is part of that, or it's like the philosophy behind the effects work is part of that. I think there's just such a well-oiled quality to the production. All the edges have been sanded off and everything has been refined in every area of the production, whether it's the animatronics and the CGI stuff, or it's the set design and building the sets, the actors' performances, the direction, the editing. All of it goes hand in hand. Obviously, the writing as well with Russell T Davies, like all of it feels so well refined and designed to fit everything else. It's one of the other things about having all the physical stuff on set is it allows like the artists and the cinematographer and all those people to be able to work with those things and shoot those things and design the lighting and all of that to fit what the effects work is going to have to do. And so it just feels like this is such an experienced team that knows what they're doing, putting this all together. And it's just, and it's absolute blast to be able to have that for a new Doctor story that also is coming out on fucking Christmas. It's incredible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I also think, like, there's something about Ncuti Gatwa's performance, which is so big and vibrant, and the word, maybe it's because part of this involves an old-timey pirate ship, it's very swashbuckling. You feel like a kind of Errol Flynn, Robin Hood kind of thing in what he's doing. And I feel like he would be so much more constrained if he were doing this performance in 2005 Doctor Who. And you couldn't have images like when he has the new gloves that he has invented and he just leans off the edge of the rope and there's that big sweeping shot around him as they're flying over London and he's just hanging off by one hand. Like, that is such a important gesture in this episode to tell you who the 15th Doctor is. And I think there's something about the size of the show around him that is giving Ncuti Gatwa license to go in the direction he's going with the performance, which is incredible. It's such a great characterization for the Doctor just from moment one, and I think it's all of a piece.
Yeah, because let's talk a little bit about the Doctor here, because I do think, I like what you're pointing out there about his performance, because it is big and it's very physical, right? And it's just, it's very like this embodied feeling performance. And when he runs or jumps and smiles and laughs, there's just this sort of, it feels like he's throwing everything into it. And yeah, it definitely like makes him feel like he's sort of like exploding out of the screen at you. And it's so charming and infectious and charismatic. And I do think that, yeah, the production around it is one of those things that really helps make that shine, because it doesn't feel like he's being constrained. He can use these sets as much as he wants. It's one of the things that makes me very excited. We don't get much of him in the TARDIS, but it makes me excited for the size of the TARDIS set with the kind of performance he's giving. It feels like it just gives him a lot of leash to be able to do the kinds of things he wants. But you definitely get a lot of stuff in here that feels different for the character in a way that's very exciting. I think the thing that stands out the most, and it was in the trailer, is him dancing in the club. Which is, you can imagine there are other Doctors that would have done something like that. Most specifically, the 11th Doctor liked to dance in big party scenes, but it was a very dorky, weird, geeky dance, and he did that kind of stuff. Whereas the Ncuti Gatwa Doctor is sensual in a way that the character has never really been. And it feels like he's so comfortable in his body and expressing that through his movement. And it's just such an interesting place to take the character that, honestly, it's something where it's like, if they wanted to make the 15th Doctor the Doctor that fucks, like, I can go with it in a way that I've never really accepted with the character. Like when David Tennant and they tried to do the stuff with the 10th Doctor and Rose, it always felt really off and weird to me because it felt like it didn't really fit the characterization. It felt like they were trying to jam like a square peg through a round hole. Here, if they wanted to do a romantic relationship with this character, not necessarily I'm saying with Ruby, but just like in general, with this interpretation of the Doctor, they wanted to do something more sexual with him, like, I would accept it. And that's, I think, like, it says a lot about what Ncuti Gatwa is bringing to the character, that it has that kind of more sensual, like, embodied energy to it, while still feeling fundamentally the Doctor. Like, it doesn't feel like it's a disconnect from the character or who he's been or where he's come from, but it just kind of feels like he's so much more comfortable in his body now compared to how the character has typically been portrayed, which has often been a little bit more kind of like awkward and aloof and a little bit out of sorts. And here, that feels resolved in a way that feels natural for the story. It felt like it was leading up to this. That's what the 14th Doctor stuff was. Honestly, that's what I think like the 12th Doctor arc was kind of leading to, and it just was never really picked up on in the 13th Doctor era. But it's something that just makes me very excited for what they're doing with this character, that they've found a different element to mine that to me feels new and exciting and different, while still feeling like it exists within the confines of a character. It's just a lens of the character we've never really seen before. Absolutely.
There are sort of two thoughts on that. One is that because of the bi-generation thing, allowing us to have a good 15 minutes with Ncuti Gatwa before he flies off in the TARDIS in the previous episode, I get the feeling he's been the Doctor for a while when we meet him here, right? Like, this is not, he flew off in the TARDIS and landed in Ruby Sunday's backyard. He's been doing this for a while. And so there's kind of a ninth Doctor quality of, we're back, but the Doctor has been the Doctor for an indeterminate amount of time. And I like that. I like that he's just getting to hit the ground running in a very different way, where it's not just that he has been the Doctor in terms of other lifetimes, but in this body, he's used to this version of himself. And I like that. And the other thing, let's not beat around the bush about this. He's queer. He's queer as fuck. Yeah. To use the term of a Russell T Davies show that made him famous, queer as folk. And like, that's awesome. And there's also something that, Russell T Davies is gay. And he got to write in some of those things in his first run on Doctor Who, but he didn't necessarily get to write it for the Doctor. And I think there is something cool about there just feels like there is more of that kind of personal connection being poured into the character. That club scene, I heard a absolutely touching interview with Russell T Davies. That's inspired by how he met his husband, who passed away a couple of years ago, sadly, had a brain tumor. But he said that moment where the Doctor and Ruby meet eyes across the club was inspired by how he met the man he, spent his life with. And I think you can feel that kind of passion in there. And I just love the way this Doctor talks and moves and acts. It is so confident, and it feels lived in a way of Russell T Davies as a writer, and then Ncuti Gatwa, who is also openly queer, pouring that into the character. And it's there in all of it, and there's such lovely touches to it that one of the moments that just sells you on this Doctor so completely is when he's talking to the policeman after the big snowman falls on his head, and he gets a ping from the Sonic of like, you've got an engagement ring in your pocket, and he gives that whole spiel about I can tell what it is. You must be heterosexual because men would never like a diamond like that. And she's absolutely going to say yes because the sales start Tuesday and you just couldn't wait. So obviously you love her. And I was like, how can you not just adore this character after a moment like that?
Yeah. And it's just like there's an emotional openness and honesty to the character that, again, it feels like an achievement of something like the character has reached that he has struggled with through multiple lifetimes, particularly in modern Doctor Who. It's also an element in Classic Doctor Who, particularly around like the Sylvester McCoy version of the character. But in modern Who, when you have like the Time War stuff and the trauma and all of that, and the Doctor's like constantly kind of like hiding things and manipulating things, there's something about, and we might get that some of those characterization elements with this Doctor at certain points. But it feels like the sort of statement with them is that those are not the elements we're leaning on with this version of the character. That's not kind of the stuff we're trying to mine, is less of the trauma around them being potentially a war criminal and and them being like manipulative and dark in those kinds of ways. We're kind of leaning into different sides of the character, again, all stemming from stuff that's there, because I think you can, in that scene you're pointing out with the policeman, I think you can imagine any of the Doctors doing that scene and them all having a slightly different way in which they do it, but it feels like a very quintessentially Doctor kind of thing about them observing something and being kind about it. Some of them, I think, would be kind in this sort of slightly more cynical way, like maybe the Peter Capaldi version, especially like season 8, would have been a little bit like kind of darker or weirder, cynical about the way they delivered the lines, but still would have tried to do this thing for this person. But there's an openness to the way that Ncuti Gatwa plays that moment that is very infectious and heroic in a kind of different way that is very exciting. And all of that kind of stuff we're talking about, I think I also love it lives in the way the character dresses, which has such a different energy. So, because you've got some of it is like in that scene, which follows the club scene, that's all Ncuti Gatwa in a white tank top with a fucking kilt, which is some incredible energy there. That is amazing. And obviously there's a blending of like the kilt is a type of skirt. And so there's a sort of like gender queerness to that. But also Ncuti Gatwa is also Scottish. And so it's also just legitimately a kilt. And so it kind of does both of those things. But obviously like the club context gives it a kind of more queer valence than a kilt normally would have. But then his normal costume throughout the episode has this like incredible 70s energy to it that is pretty amazing. And I think it's like the first time that Doctor Who has like really deliberately mined a retro aesthetic from a time period in which Doctor Who as a show existed. Yes. Right? Like typically if it's mined a retro aesthetic, it's more like this sort of classic Edwardian kind of gentleman thing that the John Pertwee Doctor wears and stuff. Here it's like, no, I mean, Doctor Who existed in the 70s and there's some very quintessentially 70s ass Doctor Who. And this version of the Doctor is kind of mining a lot of the 70s aesthetic, but from a more kind of counterculture perspective than Doctor Who necessarily was. And I love that. Like the leather jacket with the shirt that has the zip that's like down most of the way. The colors of everything is so vibrant. And it just adds to the whole very different vibe of the character.
I love it, and I love that it's very clearly modular. Any kind of modular Doctor costume are great, where you can kind of loosen it up over time, because just in this episode, he has the sort of rainbow shirt on under the leather jacket for most of it, but when Ruby comes into the TARDIS at the end, he's changed into a different shirt under the leather jacket, and so I think there's a lot of room to play there. And I also saw an interview with Ncuti Gatwa talking about this, where he said he's been working very closely with the costume designer on Who, and a goal for him with the character is to try to broaden the costume design and try to do more kind of areas of England, different kinds of subcultures, bring that in. We've already seen glimpses of, there's the episode that's going to be set in the 60s where he's dressed like someone in a blaxploitation movie that looks fucking awesome, and I can't wait for that costume. But I like that idea that the Doctor is going to play dress up a little more, because, that's awesome. And we've had hints of that in Modern Who, where I think some of the best costumes have been when they've loosened it up, like late era Matt Smith or Peter Capaldi's seasons 9 and 10, where they gave him more variations on the attire, is something that I think can be really helpful. And when you've got a performer like Ncuti Gatwa who is doing something this physical and big, and where the clothing is so much a part of his characterization, I like that they're loosening it up, and it makes me very excited to see where they go with it in the episodes to come once we have a regular season going.
Yeah. And then part of that whole aesthetic is also the new design for the sonic screwdriver, which I adore. Again, just like very much this kind of cool, weird 70s counterculture sci-fi energy with this. It's, it's kind of like a weird TV remote kind of thing with a big disc on it. But I'm way into it. We've been stuck with variations on the same basic sonic screwdriver design for a very long time, and I like that. I appreciate that they're kind of going out of their way to try to find a different look for it that matches this very different vibe this version of the character has.
Yes, because I think it's best of both worlds again. 14th Doctor he really only used it in his first episode, but he got I think basically the best version possible of the classic sonic screwdriver, really well made prop. And then they toss that out, and Ncuti Gatwa has something totally new. There's a video on YouTube, if you want to go look, of him introducing you to the Sonic and all the pieces of it. That's very fun. It's even got basically like a USB hub in the back, so there's a logic for him to plug it into the TARDIS and stuff. But I love it. It is very different. It's a prop that kind of stands out more, especially after, again, 20 years of the classic magic wand kind of thing. And I think if they wind up bringing back some of the effects that we saw in the Star Beast that the Doctor has with the new Sonic, I think those will make more sense coming out of something like this than they would necessarily from the old style Sonic. So all of that is fun. Really the only prop, the new piece we don't get a ton of in this episode, is the TARDIS, but we saw plenty of it in the last 3 episodes, so we know it's going to be awesome. And the last shot where Ruby comes in is a very good one.
Yes. Yeah.
Also, just a second, speaking on the TARDIS, we did not praise this enough for the 60th specials. The interior of the TARDIS got a glow up, we know that. The exterior of the TARDIS looks better than it ever has. There's something about the prop that they're using, the paint, that is not as much of a solid blue, but has a little more of tonal variation in it. I know this is a weird thing to praise. It's a really good TARDIS exterior, and that alone is also worth celebrating.
Yeah, and it's got a very nice, rich, dark blue to it. Because sometimes, there's a variation. Sometimes you have this kind of darker blue. At certain periods, it's a much kind of lighter blue. And I definitely prefer the darker color. And it's a very good physical prop of the blue police box that they have to haul around whenever they go film on location. Be like, we gotta plop it on some random spot in the middle of nowhere. It's we're back in a weird Welsh quarry. Well, let's bring the big fucking blue box with us.
Absolutely. So that's all the ephemera around the Doctor. But again, that central performance, this is the most movie star energy anyone's brought into Doctor Who since Tennant. I think it's kind of appropriate that Ncuti comes out of Tennant also, because I think they have a similar, Peter Capaldi brings character actor energy to Doctor Who, right?
Yes.
Tennant and Ncuti Gatwa bring movie star energy. It's a very different movie star energy between the two, but that's the kind of feeling you get out of it, which again is also why the bigger budget that they're working with feels like it plays to those strengths, Peter Capaldi wouldn't necessarily need the giant special effects around him in the same way, because it's a smaller kind of world he's playing in. It's big, it's movie star. It feels like it should be up on a big screen. It's great.
Yeah, there's also, there's not a lot of insane stunt work. It's not Mission Impossible, but you do get some stunt stuff with Ncuti that is more than you normally get with the Doctor, right? Of him jumping onto the ladder, him jumping off of the steeple of the church and that kind of stuff. That there's a very physical kind of thing that are the sorts of stunts that you would not have Peter Capaldi do, for various reasons, especially given like the age and stuff. But there's just this, there's that youthful energy to his performance that allows him to do those stunts. And then the production sort of has the space to be able to build a big set and do a big jump and stuff like that normally they would not have been able to really do. That's also part of that, the production being able to sort of allow this performance to do things that you don't often get to see the Doctor do.
Yes. One other thing I want to talk about with the Doctor while we're on this is, as we said earlier, this is not an angsty portrayal of the Doctor yet at all. The one thing we get is bringing in the sort of adoption theme. And we'll get to that with Ruby Sunday in a minute, but this brings this up for the Doctor. You and I are both suspicious of anything to do with the Timeless Child shit because it's bad. I will say this. It is an actual character thing they're asking to play. This is, again, it's what we said with the Jodie Whittaker stuff. It's as bad as it is because there's no actual character link to it.
Yeah.
And the way they play it, I like, where I don't get the sense that this Doctor has been going around being sad every day about being adopted. What it feels like in this episode is that he makes this connection with Ruby, and it makes him think about it in a way he has not before. Like, when he says that line of, I was adopted, it sounds like that kind of came into his head at that moment. And there's something about that, like, I can play with that. That's an interesting characterization that I like, where it gives him some maybe new character mystery, but it doesn't necessarily feel like this horrible existential ennui, I was a war criminal kind of thing.
Yeah, I definitely like what they're doing with it here. I mean, one of the things that's funny about it is, like, as far as we know, the Doctor was adopted, right?
Yes.
Like, you don't even need the Timeless Child
That's
shit
true.
for that to be true. Like, I think there's lots of stuff that vaguely implies that that's the case. Like, if you go back to Hellbent and all the stuff of him going back to that old shack and all of that, and the little hints of the Doctor's youth you get in Listen, like, it doesn't feel like a big stretch to say, oh, this is an orphan or something like that. I think it's kind of what it implies a bit about him. And it would make sense with the character's wanderlust that part of it would come from not having a sort of stable family life when he was a child. Like, it that kind of connects. So it's like, really, you don't even need the insane, oh, I'm some entity from another universe that was dropped off here and then experimented on by the Time Lords before they were Time Lords, and I'm the source of all the Time Lord shit. That's basically them studying me. I also lived like 1,000 lifetimes that I've forgotten. Like, all that stuff you do not need, because it's
true.
Bad and exhausting. Here, just sort of clarifying it down to the point that in many ways, from what I understand, is what the point was supposed to be. Like, I believe that Chris Chibnall was adopted, and that's part of where that storyline came from, was him putting that into the show. The problem is it just never felt like he knew how to explore that idea narratively. It just was an idea. Let's make the Doctor adopted and make, like, their identity a plot point, but we don't know how to tell a story around that and anchor that in a way that feels meaningful to the character. And here, they really anchor it and make it feel meaningful, while, as you say, not making it overwhelming, because it doesn't make sense for that to be something that completely overwhelms the Doctor. It feels like a thing that is more this introspective question that he's sort of exploring piece by piece. And the way that they do that scene, I think, is gorgeous, because it happens where he's looking at the baby, Lulu, and he's hearing them talk, Ruby and her mother, about all the stuff that's happened with the call from that show. And while they're doing that, he looks at the baby. There's a close-up on Ncuti. There's a close-up on the baby's face. And then there's a close-up back to Ncuti where he says, I was adopted. And they kind of go back and forth about it. He says, I only found out about it recently. And yeah, it does have the right kind of, I think, balance to it, of where it emotionally anchors the episode. It draws this connection between the Doctor and Ruby. They're both people who are sort of exploring where they came from and what that means to them. And that coincidence is both what brought them together, and then that coincidence is the engine that creates the climax of the plot. Like, all that stuff is incredibly well done, and it doesn't... The thing I appreciate about it is that it's not spending its energy on all of the weird, dumb canonical implications of all of that shit. It's not talking about his lost lifetimes or the like weird sort of forgotten abuse he suffered at the hands of Tecteun and the ancient Time Lords. None of that shit's coming in because all of that is a weird distraction to the actual emotional story that's going on here. The emotional story is about someone learning that they didn't come from where they thought they came from and trying to understand what that means about how they understand themselves. And that's an interesting story. That's an interesting story that has been told many times in other stories. It's a good plot line and a good character dynamic to explore. It's just you have to actually explore that dynamic, not all the weird ephemera you throw up around it as these like sci-fi trappings around that reveal.
Absolutely. Because, go back to the Time War in the RTD years. In the actual RTD 4 seasons, we never learned that much about the Time War. Stephen Moffat actually did way more to flesh that out in the 50th and some of that stuff, because it's not really a plot point in those episodes, it's a character point. It's this effort to bring the Doctor in with this sense of kind of mystery and guilt that then you can play off with the companions and the characters. That's something RTD was very good at building in. And the problem in the Chibnall years is that it's a dumb idea to start with, but it's 100% plot. It's not a character thing. It doesn't connect to his companions. There's not like something about Yaz that ties into the Tecteun stuff that Jodie Whittaker can then tie together, right? Whereas here, right off the bat, we've got it with all the sides that Ncuti Gatwa is getting to play off of Millie Gibson and the other people in the episode. And it's beautiful. And it also, some of those moments are where you also get not just big movie star Ncuti Gatwa, but the more intimate side where you see he's also you put a close-up on him and have him emote, and he's amazing. Like the scene where Ruby has disappeared and he's talking to the mother who in this timeline has not had that kind of healing presence of all the children in her life, and he's got tears coming down his eyes. Or I think one of the best moments of the episode is when he sees Ruby's mother walking away in the past, and there's just no dialogue there, but you can hear him practically through like his facial work going, do I go after her? No, it's not my place to do that. And like you can just see him go through all those emotions, and then he goes back in the TARDIS. And he's incredible. And I think this episode does a good job of building in those different sides of the character too.
Yeah, and I think I just like the whole way, sort of the perspective with which it's looking at the topic of adoption and foster parents and that kind of stuff. I think it's got the right perspective on it, that it's not using adoption as this sort of cheap source of drama. It's because it's looking at it as like, it's this beautiful thing that has changed these people's lives, right? And that's the thing that brings the Doctor to tears, is thinking about that the fact that Carla, Ruby's mother, adoptive mother, never had this presence, never had Ruby as this child to raise that gave her this different perspective on things, that she grew up to be this much more cynical person who is using this system to her advantage, but is not really gaining anything actually meaningful from it. She's only getting this sort of like, it's this nightmarish version of adoption and being a foster mother, where all it is a monetary transaction, and that's it. And that's this sort of like evil, dark, alternate universe, alternate reality. The warm, real reality, the real place that we live in, is the one where this is a thing that has changed this woman's life, and it's made her better. And she has taken that and given that to these 33 or 32, I guess, other children. If Ruby's the first one. She's given this to all these other people and helped change all these other lives, and put up the photo on the fridge for each one. And that's the thing that brings the Doctor so much joy, is thinking about, oh, this doesn't have to be a dark, negative thing. That the people who had to leave this child behind, obviously we're going to revisit this at some point. I'm sure it's going to be some kind of plot point. For the purposes of at least this episode and what we've seen so far, I like that it doesn't have a judgmental attitude. That I think it understands that people have reasons for why this happens. There are reasons why this child has been left behind, and it's not really the Doctor's business to pry into that. And so, yeah, the Doctor watches as she walks away, and that's fine. It's fine that Ruby was left there, because there is this other world and these other families waiting, and you've got her adoptive mother here, And I just think that there's just such a kind of positive energy to how it's looking at that storyline. And so it's not allowing the sort of character point about adoption and wondering about where you come from be this thing that sort of casts aspersions on the concept of adoption and what that means for people. And I really appreciated that.
Yeah. And neither you or I were adopted, so we can't speak to this directly. But, my favorite cousin that I have, I will play favorites here, on my mom's side was adopted from South Korea. And a very similar scenario to Ruby Sunday here, left by a parent at a place where, someone would find her and then put her up for adoption. And it, like, all the emotions of it feel pretty much in line with how I know it from that personal relationship I have. And I like that it is not, it's also like you get the sense that Ruby, she wants to know out of curiosity, but it's not like she will be an incomplete person if she never finds out. There's not that kind of like, which I think some adoption stories can get into in a way that is very toxic, right? Of like, well, the found family can't possibly be real or give you what you need to know. And I like how it plays that. I'm sure people will have different opinions on it because it is obviously a tough topic to represent, but it is such a more open-hearted, I think, one than you often see here. And once again, we get the magic of Russell T Davies giving his companion a whole fucking family that I look forward to seeing more times in the future.
Yeah, so let's talk about her. Let's talk about Ruby, because one thing I love about this is kind of what you said at the beginning of this conversation is that Millie Gibson, the actress, is currently 19. She would have at least been 18 when they filmed this. And it is like very refreshing to have the companion played by an actress that is basically the age of the companion. Most like companions, the actresses has to play younger than they are, right? Because most of them are actresses who are in their mid to late 20s having to play basically like a teen. I have to play like 18, 19, 20-year-old. And there's something nice about this, like, no, there's like a legitimate youthfulness to Ruby Sunday where, like, watching it made me feel incredibly old, but I looked at her as like, oh yeah, she's a kid. Like, she's, she's not like a kid, but she is, broadly speaking, a child in compared to, the way that most companions feel like, oh, this is like an adult woman. Ruby doesn't feel quite there yet, because she's still, there are elements of her that remind me of students I've taught. I don't teach seniors, but, I have taught classes that went on to be seniors. I've taught people who were born in 2004. So it's like there's something I see in her that is so authentic about that kind of person. And I feel like it gives it such a different energy. Like, it doesn't feel like they're having to play up the youthfulness or have to play the character young. They don't have to write the character in a way to make her feel like she's Gen Z or something like that. All of that just feels incredibly authentic because it's coming from an authentic person. And it just gives it a very different energy that just makes her feel like this very kind of modern person living a real life. And that real life touch is obviously the RTD special of having that. Here's a whole family life. Here's like a real backstory. Here's a real lived in experience for this character. You don't have a Yaz situation of we had her, she's a cop in the first episode because that was a convenient plot point, and then it never comes up again. And then she has the sister, and that comes up in like 2 episodes because we need a supporting character. Here it feels like, I think you can just tell that RTD loves coming up with this stuff. I think you can tell that, like, his heart is in building this whole family life, in this whole history for the character, and seeing how that informs who they are, and really exploring that, because he's done that with every single companion that he's done. And, he's doing it here again with Ruby Sunday, and like with all of his other companions, with Rose, with Martha, with Donna, it has always worked really well, and I think it works equally well here, just with a person who is from a very different generation because of how much time has passed, and they cast someone who is legitimately that young.
It's the thing that like distinguishes his style from Stephen Moffat's. It's why and I love both styles. But it's why RTD's style is so Earth-centric and contemporary Earth-centric, because he wants to bring in the family and like the milieu that they came from, sometimes the social and economic milieu, whereas RTD is much more, Robert Holmes' Fourth Doctor, we're going off into the stars, and so we don't need all of that stuff. We're going to explore the companion on the road. We never meet Clara's parents. We never meet Amy's parents. I think Clara's parents are in an episode and we don't see them them, is basically how that happens in Time of the Doctor, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's like her, I don't remember if it's her parents. There's some of her family. She has her like Nan is in that episode.
Yes.
I remember. But it's certainly, they're like never a focus, because it's Moffat, I think, is much more interested in having the companion be part of the engine of the sci-fi fantasy elements of the show and exploring that dynamic, and then their sort of complicated relationship with the Doctor in sometimes a kind of meta fashion of looking at that Doctor-companion relationship and what that says both historically with that character dynamic in the show and how to play with and evolve it. And that's obviously like the whole Clara storyline. But yes, here it's about, let's take a normal person who's living a normal life in our world and find the kind of beauty and love and magic that exists within that normal person in the normal family life, and then take them out on these big adventures. And that's what they're doing here again.
Yes, I love it. And it's not just her direct family, and I like her family. I like her mom. I love her grandma, Cherry Sunday, which is just, also, let's just back up. Ruby Sunday is one of the best named companions in Doctor Who history, and Cherry Sunday might be an even better name. I love it. I hope we see more of them. But we also get, it's a brief scene, but we get that she plays in a band with these friends. That's the scene where they're in the car and the Doctor changes it to the green light so they can go on. Also, just a nice little setup for her being musical, because we do have the companion sing in this episode. She's not the singer of the band, but she obviously has musical ability, which, since Ncuti Gatwa clearly fucking does too, setting up, I think, the finally we need to do it, the Doctor Who musical episode at some point, because we've got two people who can clearly carry that. But anyway, I like that even though this episode is very busy, and it's not particularly long, something to praise about all these 4 specials is he got all of them in under an hour, which is kind of amazing when you consider the amount of plot in all of these. But we do get a sense of her life, and obviously we'll get more of it in the future, but a lot going on here.
Yeah. And then you also do have, one thing I do appreciate is there is a little bit more kind of Clara energy to her, though, with like she just kind of rolls with the madness in a way that Clara did, right? And that's like one of the things that distinguished her as a companion, that made her that Clara was the same kind of person as the Doctor, right? And that's so much about what their relationship was like. And I don't necessarily think they're going that far with Ruby, but I do think that, I think RTD is very clearly, with this second run, he is influenced by some of the things that Moffat did when Moffat was in control of the show. I think part of like the turn towards fantasy is partially informed by that, because that's a little bit of what Moffat also did, was bringing in this kind of fantastical fairy tale energy to it. And I think some of that is also, going back, redoing the Donna stuff and revisiting that character and kind of correcting some of the mistakes they made with how they resolved that storyline, and a little bit of like the energy that Ruby has of just being like, yeah, there are weird little monsters here. That is kind of crazy, but they're taking this baby, and that's what I need to deal with. So I'm going to jump on this ladder. And it leads to that great moment of the Doctor running on the rooftop. Just like, what are you doing? Like, what? You just see a ladder ascending into the sky, and you just grab onto it? Like, what kind of person does that? And then as soon as he does that, he jumps on with her, because, of course, that is also the kind of person the Doctor is. And it gives you this, like, nice sort of, it's such an efficient way of making it very clear this is the kind of person that should be going on adventures with the Doctor, because she can handle the madness, she can roll with it. And it's like the insanity of the goblin ship and all of that doesn't send her into sort of like an emotional crisis. It makes her excited about it. She's not afraid of them. She's not sort of cowed by them. Her worldview isn't even necessarily sort of devastated by the existence of these weird creatures. It's more like she sees this like, this is insane, I need to save that baby, but this is also kind of awesome.
Yes.
And that's a cool energy to have that reminds me more of a kind of Moffat style companion. It's more Clara, it's more Bill. It's kind of got that side to it.
I absolutely agree, and I really like that here. I think there's 2 other moments that just define it for me are Ncuti Gatwa decides he's going to sing, and she sings with him, right? Yes. And she is on her, I like her lines are more like improvised than his are, which is funny. Like her rhymes are more awkward because she's definitely like, this is crazy, but she's in on the crazy. Really like that. And then also, I don't know if, maybe in Classic Who at some point, this is the first time I've seen a companion independently deduce that the Doctor is a time traveler without seeing the TARDIS, which is a fucking awesome way to like kick into the end of this episode of the Doctor kind of goes off and then she in the background deduces this guy must be a time traveler. I want to go see what's up. And then she goes into the TARDIS. That's awesome.
Yes, and I love the way they do the shot of like her. She opens up, you see her look into the TARDIS. This kind of like reverse shot where you don't see the TARDIS set. She closes the door, you walk around it, you have this nice like, top-down shot. Yeah, because we've, there's just, at this point, Doctor Who, we've had to do this a lot of the, bigger on the inside thing. And so everyone has to, you always have to do a slightly different take on it. One of the best was the Bill one, where they go in and the camera's super tight in on them while they're crowded by the door and the lights are off. And then slowly the camera pulls back until you see the whole thing and the lights turn on. Like, that's one of the best ones. This is up there with just like a very creative, interesting way to visually make it clear to the audience the madness of everything in here is contained in this weird little box you can see on the screen.
Yes. Absolutely. And then she and Ncuti Gatwa also just have great chemistry. I'm excited to see them bounce off of each other more. That all plays very well. It's, we're definitely, the feeling that you get overwhelmingly from this episode is that we have an unbelievably firm foundation for the season to come. Yes. And that is the biggest, job this episode had.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it needs to introduce all these things and make you feel like excited to continue with the show. And it does that in spades.
A couple other things to praise. I want to say the Murray Gold scores have been really good throughout this 2023 run. I think it's particularly good here because he's bringing in more themes that I think he's going to be developing, obviously, for Ruby, for the 15th Doctor, but particularly the scene you just mentioned where she approaches the TARDIS, sees it, then goes back around. It is such prime Murray Gold. You're hearing stuff from, 10, 11, 12, all of those eras where he was just on fire, and it's so good to have him back. And then, of course, they also do a full musical number, which I think you would only do if you had a relationship like this where Russell T Davies has worked with Murray Gold forever, not just on Doctor Who, but on his other shows. And so I think there's a trust there of like, if I write a crazy musical number in here, I've got someone who can pull the weight on it. And the musical number is absolutely delightful. I love that it is completely evil. The goblins singing about how they're going to eat this baby. It's like a scary nursery rhyme kind of thing. And then the Doctor pulls in on it and Ruby joins him. And I wanted to stand up and cheer as a big Christmas Day gesture. That was my favorite part of the episode.
Yeah, I like if you watch the behind the scenes thing, Russell T Davies goes into like the fact that he's wanted to do a musical number in Doctor Who forever, but like has needed to sort of create the situation in which it could happen.
Yes.
And I agree with him. That's like, Doctor Who is not the kind of show really that normally would do this. It's just slightly outside of the kind of tone space of the show. So you have to do something special. And I think that having one going harder into the fantasy element, and so having the goblins, having set up the idea that the goblins can be here, and then doing all the sort of like legwork with the Doctor talking about, I've got to learn the language of ropes, and I've got to learn like the logic of this new physics of coincidence and luck and those things. I love all that writing and how Ncuti Gatwa delivers it. It's one of the things we were very assured by in the Giggle was that he got all the weird technobabble. He gets all of it here, but it's like it's all really well done and very interesting. And so the kind of RTD anchors the kind of fantasy logic within the world of Doctor Who in a way you can accept. And then it being a Christmas special, I think also gives it that extra element of sort of like jolly and cheer to it that allows it to do that. Even if the musical number is about eating babies, it is within the kind of Christmas wheelhouse. Because there's lots of other little Christmas isms around the show, like the whole idea of Ruby Sunday disappearing and that sort of seeing that alternate world has It's a Wonderful Life or Christmas Carol vibe to it. There are lots of little elements like that he puts in. The church on Christmas evening and it's snowing outside, all that kind of stuff. And it allows that musical number to really sort of feel like it fits within the episode and what the whole show is doing right now. And then, it's just awesome. Like, it's a great fucking tune. I think it was smart, and I love that they did put out like part of it before not the part where the Doctor sings. They didn't show you that, which is very smart, but they did show you on YouTube and stuff, and they released the first part of the Goblin song where the Goblin singing, and it's like, I listened to that a couple of times because it's just a good song, and it's just kind of, it's a bit of a banger, and it makes you, it's a groove. You kind of get into it. You hear about goblins gobbling up babies, and then when the Doctor breaks into it and you hear how good of a singer Ncuti Gatwa is, and how much fun it is of him singing and sort of like weaving in how he's about to escape this situation into the lyrics. All that stuff is just so good that, yeah, it makes you want to kind of jump up and cheer once he talks about, oh, we've like the master knot is undone, and then it breaks and they jump down and he says, the thing is with intelligent gloves, if you reverse them, you get heavy, and they just drop all the way down. It's a great moment.
It's such a great moment. Such a big movie star flex to have him do that in his first big episode. Like, holy cow. I'm struggling to think there's a lot of good Doctor introduction stories. That might be the biggest fucking mic drop a Doctor has had in their first story, to just like, I'm cool in all these other ways, and I can fucking sing. Holy crap.
Yeah.
Also, before we gloss over it, I love that the Doctor is inventing stuff again. He's got his cool gloves. That is the thing that with the sonic screwdriver, they've leaned on too hard for too long, is the sonic screwdriver is this thing that the second Doctor made while he was tinkering. And the Doctor should be making more stuff like that instead of just using that one object. You got that a little bit with the 12th Doctor making his sonic sunglasses. I like that he's made a new invention, and it's fun to see. And I don't need it to be in every episode from now on, but I'd like to see him make more inventions.
Yes, yeah, because it is a thing that definitely, like, David Tennant did. I feel like the Peter Capaldi Doctor did it. Because the Peter Capaldi Doctor often had weird little one-off gadgets and weird shit in episodes. That was fun. Yeah, I agree. I'd like when that's part of the character, because that definitely for me comes back to like the Third Doctor, Fourth Doctor era. You got a lot of that kind of stuff where the Third Doctor just had insane James Bond gadgets and Bessie and all that kind of shit. And then the Fourth Doctor, it was less that he invented stuff, but he more just had random shit in his pockets he'd pull out. It's like, oh, yes, this thing. It'll just solve this situation very specifically because that's just the way it works. Or it's a yo-yo or it's jelly babies or whatever. Yeah, having some of that sort of mad scientist energy is very good.
Absolutely. So what else to say about this episode? I think this isn't like a huge criticism. I do think that middle scene on the ship is so good, the episode doesn't quite reach that level again. I think the following scenes, like, I like all the plot stuff. I think it takes the Doctor slightly too long once he realizes what has happened with Ruby disappearing for him to run off and get in the TARDIS. I think that scene is a little too elongated. And I think the climax, I like it a lot. And I think it's a great, cool moment of him, spearing the ship on the church spire is great. I do think there's just a little bit of like, as in like a lot of action movies, the second act kind of peaks and it doesn't quite get back up there again. Not a huge criticism, but that's like, if I had to name one, that would be it.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. Like, I do think that the episode could be tightened up. Like, I think that some of the stuff in the first act goes a little long. Some of the stuff in the third act goes a little bit long. And I think, there's a few things like that. Because, I mean, I do really enjoy this episode a lot. I think it's great. But I don't necessarily think it's not, to me, like if you're ranking the Doctor intro stories, this is not 11th Hour or Spearhead from Space level to me. It's not like, oh, this is an all-time classic. But it's definitely at least in, like, Rose or, kind of Deep Breath. Deep Breath to me maybe has like higher highs and lower lows than this, because if you want to talk about a thing that needs to be tightened up, Deep Breath is the Doctor Who episode that most needed to be tightened up, but also has some like all-time great scenes in it. So yeah, it's like, it's definitely in that pack, but it's definitely way head and shoulders above something like Christmas Invasion to me.
Or like, I think Robot would be a good comparison, where like there are some all-time great moments in this. As a story overall, it isn't necessarily, but it does everything it needs to do to get the new era off and running. I think Robot might be the closest comparison I would make to this one in terms of quality. But yeah, I think it's still the top is Spearhead from Space and 11th Hour. I don't know if they're ever going to top those, but yeah, but in terms of just giving a showcase for the new Doctor, man, this is very good at that.
Yeah, it is an incredibly fun episode. I liked it more on the second time I watched it, and I already liked it a lot the first time through. But yeah, it's great. There is that weird moment at the end we do need to talk about though with the old lady, what is Mrs. Flood. That I find this whole like sort of ending section of the episode is very interesting to me because there's a couple things that happen here. Obviously, you have the big sort of fourth wall breaking moment at the end where she looks into camera and says, "What, have you never seen a TARDIS before?" and literally winks, which I don't know if RTD was thinking about the moment, and I think it's the Dalek invasion of Earth, or maybe it's Dalek Master Plan, where William Hartnell just says it's like, and a Merry Christmas everyone at home, and he's clearly slightly drunk on wine, and it's fucking great. But there is precedent for fourth wall breaking specifically on Christmas. Obviously Doctor Who's broken the fourth wall plenty of times before, but it is this interesting little moment where that character in the first 2/3 of the episode, basically everything before the Doctor coming back from going and saving Ruby, that character doesn't have that energy to her. She just seems like an angry old lady on her porch. And then once the Doctor comes back, she's all of a sudden very like familiar with what's happening, kind of waving at him, and is much more kind of like smiling and happy, and kind of seems like she's got that little twinkle in her eye. That then she also is the person who sort of like points Ruby to the TARDIS and says, "Good luck, Ruby." And so I find that whole dynamic very interesting. And alongside that, I do think it's potentially notable. This might be nothing. This might be a season 5-esque little continuity thing that they're going to use. It's notable to me that the Doctor's wearing different clothes when you see him again in the TARDIS. That there's a clear gap between he goes into the TARDIS, you cut into the flat with Ruby, she works out he's a time travel, she comes back out. Eventually she goes into the TARDIS, and then the Doctor is wearing just a different shirt, but everything else is the same. That it creates a space where potentially the Doctor has time traveled in that gap, and something has happened there that also might be connected to that Mrs. Flood character. But it definitely feels like there are little pieces that RTD is showing there that he's clearly going to pick up.
Yes, absolutely. I will say the Disney Plus edit of this is different than what aired on the BBC. Mm-hmm. On the BBC, you went from the end of the episode where he says, "I'm the Doctor," and it went to credits, and after the credits you had the scene with Mrs. Flood. I think it works better as a pure post-credit scene. On Disney Plus, yes, the way they did it is he says, "I'm the Doctor." It had a brief little ad just making it clear the show's on Disney Plus now, new season in the spring, and then we got that scene, and then the credits. And I think I kind of understand that on a streaming service, because streaming services have kind of made you skip credits and not wait, whereas if it's airing on BBC, it's on TV. You wait through the credits and you watch it. But I do think that scene makes more sense as a post-credit scene.
Yes, yeah, 100%. But it is clearly meant to be setting up something weird with this lady, because regardless, like, she just is like a different person when he comes back from the past. Yes. In a way that I'm curious. Obviously, the thing that every fucking dumbass Doctor Who fan online immediately thought was like, it's the Ronnie, because they always think it's the Ronnie. It's not the Ronnie.
Of
maybe
course it's
it is
not the Ronnie. It's Susan.
Yes, of course. Obviously, it's the Ronnie, or it's Susan, or maybe the Ronnie was Susan the entire time. Oh my God. Or it's the Master, or it's the Ronnie Master or Susan. But if I were to put my money down, it is an original character. That is my guess. Yes. It is almost always an original character. But it would be hilarious if it's the Ronnie. I don't know why you'd bring the Ronnie back. The Ronnie was never in a good story back in the day. She's only in 2 of them. But yes, I always, it was heartwarming to like see the old Doctor Who fan base has come back to the show, right? Like they clearly like myself a lot, and yourself, Jonathan, even more you. The show bled a lot of the fans during the Chibnall era, and they have all come back. So I've gone back to some of my old haunts on Reddit and other places online to sort of look at some of the fan reaction, and I just love that they haven't missed a fucking beat. They're like bringing out the same old tired leftover fucking weird fan theories that have been bopping around the show for fucking since 2005. And it's great, and I hope it's the Ronnie for all of you out there. I hope it's her. It's almost certainly not going to be, but wouldn't that be fun?
I love it. This is not a prediction, but this is a thought that ran into my head that made me laugh very hard when I was rewatching the episode this morning. When you see the woman who leaves Ruby Sunday walking away at the end, I went, oh, wouldn't it be funny if that was Missy? And I don't know why it would be Missy. I don't know what the plot would be there, but I love the idea that Missy has a baby and leaves it, and that is Ruby Sunday, and the absolute convolution we could get into with that. That's not what's going to happen. It's just a thought that came unbidden into my mind, and I thought I would share because it made me chuckle.
I mean, the thing that the Mrs. Flood character did make me think of was specifically season 8 in the way that they used Missy in that season. Like it did, like there is a certain Missy-esque energy to what they're doing. But I don't think it's Well, please, please don't make it the Master. We need to put the Master away. We need to put the Master in a box and let that character fucking sit, because it was ridiculous that they brought the Master back so quickly after Missy, because she was perfect, and needed to leave that character alone. If it's the Master, I will be very annoyed. I don't think it is, but...
Yeah, we need to put, like, a solid decade-long moratorium on the Master, which, it's been...
Yeah.
Not every Doctor needs to meet the Master. It's not like the Daleks or the Cybermen. And frankly, not every Doctor needs to meet the fucking Daleks and Cybermen either. We can put them to bed sometimes, too.
What if Mrs. Flood is just Neil Patrick Harris? And I don't mean the toy maker. What if it's actually Neil Patrick Harris in the universe of Doctor Who, and he's in disguise?
He's studying for a role. He is studying for a role as as an old lady in the UK, and he's in heavy amounts of makeup. Sure, go for it. Why not?
Yeah. Then, what if, it's Neil Patrick Harris, but in that universe, Doctor Who as a TV show exists, and Neil Patrick Harris played the toy maker. That's how he knows what a TARDIS is. It's all coming together. It's why he breaks the fourth wall, because it's Neil Patrick Harris from our world is in Doctor Who and is in disguise. Clearly, this is what I have cracked.